What's up, everybody? We are back on a Friday night, and we got a great show for you tonight. We're going to talk about how Yoda is confirmed to have finally known R2-D2. That's right. This is something that has been pretty much on Star Wars fans' mind for a long time. We're going to talk about that tonight. The High Republic has revealed another Grandmaster to us. And, of course, Kevin Feige's Star Wars film is back on track. But first, Palpatine's power has been revealed. That's right, we finally know how he was able to cut the Force off from the Jedi, and it's all coming up right now.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So this has been kind of interesting because we've been getting a lot of High Republic news lately.
Yeah, man. It's January, New Year, so we were promised the High Republic, and it's here. The first comic is out, and also the first book is out, I believe.
Yep, I have both of them, and I was actually able to read the High Republic comic like right before pretty much we went on, so it's a little fresh on my mind. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I have the book. I haven't read it yet because I'm still trying to get through Thrawn Ascendancy, Chaos Rising. It's kind of like a really long title. So I'm still trying to get through that, but, you know, I'm making a lot of progress. I'm a little over halfway through it now. It's like an 800-page book. And actually, the High Republic book, Light of the Jedi, is pretty long as well. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm trying to get through that too. So hopefully, you know, I could do all that. But one of the things that was brought up in the book, and this is where we're getting the idea of how Palpatine was able to cut off the Jedi from the Force, right? It was from this book.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing about, you know, Palpatine, you know, of course we all know him to be a master strategist. We've seen him, you know, orchestrate this whole pretty much war, you know, all with the intentions of him ascending to power of the galaxy.
Right. So let's get into it right now.
Yep.
All right, so Palpatine has, as we know, amassed a lot of power over the years and everything, as you started to say. But now we're actually getting an insight into how he was able, because, you know, one of the things that has been long debated, I guess, in fandom is, even though he was really super powerful, and we actually did a show about this too, where we talked about Palpatine's power and really the fact that he was a political genius and he was a strategist and he was very patient. Mm-hmm. That was actually what we had said was almost like his superpower, for lack of a better word.
Right.
But now we're actually finally getting some canon-based reasons as to how he was able to do the seemingly impossible, which was to basically cut the Jedi off from the Force. Now, we knew that he was blocking the light side, and then Yoda, of course, ends up learning how to block the dark side during the original trilogy. But we were really never taught how that was. It's like, how could you, as one guy, no matter how powerful you are, how are you able to actually cut off 10,000 plus Jedi,
right,
all from the Force, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, when you finally, you know, read the book, and I guess we got the excerpt from Light of the Jedi from the first novel of the High Republic, you know, you really start to understand, and this once again goes back to Palpatine, just how much he understands the Force, right? And not only does he understand the Force for his benefit, but he also understands the Force for his enemy's benefit. And so essentially he kind of realizes, like, okay, you know, as we hear Master Yoda say in The Phantom Menace, you know, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And you can feel all of those things in the Force. So if the Jedi are deriving their abilities from the Force from a place of peace, and that's how they're able to tap into it for their purposes. So a lot of times you'll see Jedi. We saw Qui Gon meditate on several occasions. We've seen Yoda, of course, meditate on several occasions. So you kind of see that they're kind of in their peaceful state, you know, as they're kind of pondering and they're really trying to, you know, gather themselves and put themselves in the best position. Whereas we see what a lot of people like Maul And we find out that even Palpatine, what he did with Vader, he inflicted pain upon those guys, torment, whether it was mentally, emotionally, physically, all those things fuel the Sith. So if you want to, shall we say, shut it out for everybody as far as the Jedi are concerned, you have to kind of create you have to take them out of their element. And so that's essentially what Palpatine does. He actually, with this whole war and everything, because of the uncertainty of it, it caused a lot of fear and things that were happening. Because if you remember, Mace Windu said, we're keepers of the peace, we're not soldiers. Mm-hmm. So they were never derived, or they were never, intended to be soldiers, but yet Palpatine keeps sending them as a senator, as a
general,
as a general or elected chancellor. He's sending the Jedi constantly into battle, and we see this all the time. But it never dawned on me. I was like, okay, but you have to remember what he said: they're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. And so when you're putting people who are not designed to be soldiers in these serious situations where, in their minds, they're probably figuring like the fate of the galaxy is on if I don't complete this mission, no matter how big it is, whether you're Obi-Wan, Anakin, or some other like regular Jedi Knight, there's a lot of anxiety that's going on. There's a lot of things that you can't really become calm as much as you would like to, because there's so much going on and you have so much riding on you, and there's so much anger that's flowing around. There's so much pain. You're seeing people die constantly. And so it takes the Jedi out of their element. And so when you're out of your element, you can't tap into it like you need to. And so then of course, when he's coupling that with his own kind of force powers, that's kind of pretty much how he kind of blocked that.
Yeah, well, and obviously it should come as a surprise to absolutely no one that I have a lot of thoughts on this. But before I do, let me get to some of these chats here. We got Ronaldo. Hey, Ronaldo, what's going on? It's good to see you again. He says, hello, guys. I'm still reading Light of the Jedi. Well, I haven't even started yet, so you're way ahead of me on that one. I think it's a solid story. I love Loden Greatstorms. He's great.
That's the one you actually wanted to hear, because
that was
love the
one,
name.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of thought that was almost like a Lord of the Rings, style type of a thing. Yeah, so I mean, I'm glad that he's a solid character, because he was one of those guys that immediately piqued my interest. Now, Darksage 9117 says,
yes,
you better not be trashing Papa Palps. If so, you will be forced to watch the holiday special until the younglings become adults. True story, we reviewed. We're way ahead of you, my friend, because we can even put a link in the section. But if you look on our channel, right before Thanksgiving, me, Daryl, and our good friend Dave actually did a reaction video where we watched, and that's right, we showed it. YouTube hasn't given us any kind of copyright strike. They haven't taken it down or anything.
Probably don't care about it.
Yeah, exactly, right? We actually have the holiday special in one window. We are in 2 windows, or 3 windows, actually, and we watched it and reacted to it. If you haven't seen it, it is hilarious. It was actually a much better show than I expected it to be, because I remember we were all thinking, like, how are we going to stand to be able to watch the holiday special? I remember seeing it as a kid, but I remember both you and Dave were on separate occasions going, yeah, man, I couldn't even get through, like a half hour of it or whatever. So if we had to suffer that fate, we already did. But actually, no, this isn't really about necessarily trashing our good friend Palpatine. This is really about discovering how he actually clouded the Jedi's mind, which is really what I never had thought of when this whole thing came about. Because obviously, again, I haven't read the book, but when this whole little thing came out, I was actually kind of surprised that it didn't occur to me before.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, absolutely, you keep the Jedi basically in a constant state of emotional distress, whether it would be, fear or anger or
anxiety,
or just anxiety. And you're seeing all this suffering all around you, and you're seeing just all of this craziness, and you're never really at peace. Now, of course, there were times where it kind of seemed that way. But again, you have to remember that if you're talking about the movies in the prequels, we really only see the beginning and then the very end. I mean, we see some battles, obviously, but it's really during the Clone Wars animated show
that we
finally get a glimpse as to what this whole thing was all about. And
Right.
and when you really watch it from beginning to all the way to the end, I mean, the Jedi are just being pounded. I mean, constantly. There is absolutely no rest.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're tired. I mean, you're going on this, and they also bring that up in the show. Is that like the war just goes on for so long. It's not like it's just okay, a couple of days or something. Like no, this thing's went on for maybe a couple of years. Because you actually how you can tell is Ahsoka.
Oh,
When you see Ahsoka, you see her as a little girl. She's probably like 12, maybe 12 years old or something like that. When you first see her in the Clone Wars movie, by the time the season 7 ends, she's a grown woman at that point.
Yeah.
So you can tell just watching that one character, you can see how much, or how long the war went on. And so when you think about that, like that takes a toll on people when you're constantly having to go to battle, when you're constantly in these situations, you're constantly drawing upon the Force just to survive. You can't even really use it for foresight anymore, because right now you're just totally just trying to keep yourself together and not get killed out there.
Well, and it's true too, because basically we see that they're made to be generals, and that's not their natural state. And it was really interesting to me when that came out, even in the prequels anyway, because that was something that back when you would just, you would hear about what the Clone Wars is like and little bits of information. Again, this is before the prequels actually came out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was kind of like, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you served my father during the Clone Wars, on and on it goes. But that was really the only glimpse we had into it. We didn't even know what it was.
Right.
And then you find out that the Jedi were actually military leaders in this whole thing, and that's something that you didn't really expect either. And it just, you could see where this would just be a constant pressure, and it would just be really difficult for them to even overcome this. I don't know how I would act, honestly, if I were in that situation.
Well, I mean, just think about Vietnam. I mean, that's essentially what it was.
Sure.
It's almost just like a wide galaxy sweeping Vietnam where, and they weren't just in Vietnam for like 20 minutes. Vietnam lasted a while.
Well, and when you brought up Ahsoka too, and one of the things that's really cool about that analogy, which is true, is the fact that it's not just how long it was, but if you look at the way she was in season 1, she was kind of carefree and kind of like a kid, and hey, Sky Guy, and she was trying to get up the like that wall or whatever it was first.
I'm trying to race you to the top.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was almost more fun in games. And then eventually you could see, even when she was still relatively young, we don't even have to go to like 6 or 7. I'm not talking about when she was, disenfranchised and completely just not about the Jedi way at all. But I mean, even like say during 3, 4, you can tell that she had lost a little bit of that
spunk.
Yeah, and that easygoing and carefree nature. And that just shows you what they did. And it never really occurred to me until reading this whole article that, I mean, what a perfect way for Palpatine to do that, to basically disconnect the Jedi, in a sense, from the Force and cloud their minds. And because, the whole time I was sitting there thinking, what, was he basically in his chambers or whatever, just, meditating and
summoning up all this dark energy.
Trying to do it. I mean, but it makes perfect sense and that's why he didn't realize when he was being clouded. We always go to that scene in Return of the Jedi where Vader insists that Luke is on Endor, and Palpatine's all like, "Well, strange. I haven't felt that."
Right.
But of course Vader feels it because it's his son, and that's a connection that almost pretty much acts above and beyond.
Yeah.
The natural blocking, of the dark side of the Force. I'll get it out. Having a really weird, hard time talking today for some reason. But I mean, that's one of those things that I thought was really compelling, and that's a perfect example. Now, here's another thing that I want to bring up in that. I think this is the kind of thing, and Ronaldo, you can basically speak to this because you're actually reading this book right now, but this shows you that they actually have a plan.
Yeah, this is some really good writing already.
This is some good writing. it's a good explanation. It shows that, hey, we're putting some thought into this. You know, this isn't like just, hey, we'll just pass it on to the next guy and,
He just has some brain force power. He found some crystal that allowed him, I mean, that's an easy way out to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because actually that's what, back in Expanded Universe, that's pretty much what happened. The whole Kyber crystal thing, which I actually like the way that they've spun that in the new canon to where it's powering the Death Star laser and you have all this other stuff. But I mean, at first, it was this thing that he wore around his neck and it amplified his power. And, there was all kinds of crazy explanations. Whereas they're putting that into perspective. But now you actually have a franchise, meaning the High Republic, I should say like more of an era, where the writers actually sat down, the ones that were writing the comics, the ones that were writing the books, and all these people sat down in a room and basically planned out this storyline.
Right.
Now, I can tell you, from the first issue of the comic series, again, I'm going to have to reread it to really let it soak in, but it was good, it was fun, it was a little bit more Star Wars-y than I actually expected it to be. I, for whatever reason, kind of thought that it wasn't going to be like that.
Okay.
I thought that it was going to be a little bit more, almost like a Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur,
Gotcha.
kind of more like that. And that was one of the things I was actually worried about, but it does, and you do see a young Yoda. I mean, one of the reasons why I definitely really wanted to get this comic was because it did depict a younger Yoda in the thing.
Right.
And so this is one of the things that I think that we can see right out the gate is the fact that, hey, you actually have some, not just deliberate writing, but good writing.
Yeah, I mean, because it just, once again, it strengthens, and to that point, it strengthens the character of Palpatine, and that's what I love. Palpatine is very, very intelligent, and he's kind of a master of a bunch of different crafts. He's just as great of a strategist, or even better, as Thrawn. He's very cunning. Then he also has this background in alchemy. So, now he's into all these different kind of outside traditional ways of dealing with things. He's really good into manipulation. He's really good into, he's like the ultimate bad guy. I mean, there's almost like no aspect of being a villain that he doesn't touch almost. And on top of that, he's still a formidable fighter, as we've seen. He still is super powerful when it comes to the Force himself. So I think that's just what makes everybody just love Palpatine so much, is because, it's like, where does it end with this guy?
Well, and I don't know about you, but I would love to see a series with him now more than ever.
Well, yeah, because like once again, I think you brought this up, some maybe a couple of seasons ago, but just we want to see how Palpatine, got to be that powerful, because of course we know he studied under Plagueis, and Plagueis was kind of had the thing with alchemy too, and he was really obsessed with the whole bringing people back to life, or the life force of the Force. I can say it like that. So, I think that, you do kind of take on the traits of your master, but then you kind of have your own ambitions and your own goals. And like we've always said, he's super patient. Palpatine was not in a rush. He knew, like, okay, this takes careful planning. And you said it before, even when the plan goes bad, it seems like he's not even fazed by it, because he still has another plan. It's like, oh, okay, well, they stopped this little thing.
Yeah, that's the thing that actually amazes me about him.
Like, he doesn't get really that upset about, too much, because he's like, okay.
Especially during the Clone Wars. I mean, there were so many times where you're just sitting there going like, man, I mean, his plans are just going so awry that, this just shows you how many layers there are to his plan. And if this goes wrong, it's like this guy probably had a ton of contingencies to anything that can go wrong, because the other aspect of it, and this is particularly true in the Clone Wars, although I felt this way a little bit in Revenge of the Sith as well, especially reading the book, but even seeing the movie, and that is, there were so many times that it was surprising that Palpatine just didn't reveal his power, even in the smallest way.
Mm-hmm.
But he played that sort of weak, politician kind of thing.
Doddering old man.
Yeah, I mean, basically to the very end. And in particular, I'm thinking of that episode where that one creature.
Yeah, that giant, like, Godzilla type
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
When that thing was after him, and there was a couple of times where it was like, look, man, if you don't, you're counting on the Jedi and all this stuff to save you, but at some point, it's like if you have that much power, because Palpatine could have just vanquished this thing.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. My grandfather actually, that's one of his favorite episodes. He came was like, man, I just watched this really good episode of Clone Wars. And I was like, oh, yeah, which one? He's like, it had like this dragon, like Godzilla. I was like, oh, yeah, I know which one. He's like, yeah, and like the lightsabers and things weren't working on it and everything. I was like, but see, once again, like Palpatine was noticing stuff like that, like, lightsabers aren't working on this thing. I want to kill this thing because I want to see, like, okay, well, what is this skin made out of? How can I weaponize this or use this?
Oh yeah, he was talking about he wanted to make armor out of it.
Yeah, armor out of it, of course, because then it's like, okay, well, this is going to slow down the Jedi if they can't use lightsabers. So,
yeah, because what he was thinking. All clone troopers are going to have this from now on.
Yep, and then of course too, you're also thinking about if they can't use the lightsabers, that means they're going to draw upon the Force, which is tiring. So once again, they'll become weaker faster because you're constantly trying to draw upon the Force to, deflect and try to, get out the way and do things. So, yeah. Ronaldo says, Palpatine also has extreme patience, and it's due to that patience that the Jedi could not detect it, as it was not a characteristic of the Sith. Very good point.
Actually, that is something I never even considered.
Mm-hmm.
I had never thought of that, but that's true. Patience is more of like a Jedi trait.
Yeah.
The Sith are basically all about
immediacy.
Immediacy, go in, destroy or do whatever. Oh, yeah, right. Ronaldo says it's called the Zillo Beast.
Yep.
All right. See, that's why we gotta have Ronaldo around. But Ronaldo, you bring up a really good point once again that we just didn't think of. And I mean, what's funny about it is I never really even thought about that aspect of it, that the whole patience thing is not a Sith trait.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those things that really I'm surprised that didn't occur to me before.
Well, yeah, I mean, and when you look at that, that's what's so confusing. It's kind of like hiding in plain sight because, the Jedi, of course, they're looking for that type of energy. Mm-hmm. They're looking for, and that's why Palpatine had all those apprentices like Maul and, Dooku to kind of be that face of it. So it throws them off the trail too, because it's like, okay, well, this must be the Sith Lord and that must be the Sith Lord. And it's like, okay, well, dang, we killed Dooku, but yet we're still, what the heck? And then eventually, he's like, okay, I'm just going to chill out until I can get Anakin. Because he didn't take on any other apprentices after that.
No, but I mean, the thing that was really funny to me too, this is what made that whole Yoda thing really hilarious when it's like, or did Mace say it? Yeah, it was Mace, I think, that said it. It's like, yeah, but which one did we kill, the master or the apprentice?
Right.
It's like, you got to be thinking about that because obviously you would think that maybe, the Sith Lord's acting alone or this is like their only thing or whatever, but it's not necessarily the case. And I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons why Palpatine was able to do what he did, because he so brilliantly masked his own involvement, and you didn't really see any other obvious master or apprentice, really. So I think after a while, when they initially asked that question in episode 1, it was kind of like, you never really heard anybody question that after that.
Well, the funny thing is, they probably thought it was Dooku.
Yeah, they could have, that because he is the next prominent guy, and that would make sense because he was once a Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
He turned, so maybe he ended up training Maul. I mean, that could very well actually, that would fit.
Because Maul is, if you look at Maul, is a lot like Ventress.
Mm-hmm.
So when Maul is gone, then you see Ventress pop up. You would kind of think, all
yeah,
right.
you would start to do that, exactly. And that's probably why they thought that after Dooku was gone, the Sith problem was gone. Because if you think about it, it's true. There was nobody after that.
Well, that's what they were hunting down the whole time. It was a Dooku and Grievous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They were the faces of the war, basically.
Right. And then, of course, they thought that the Sith problem was done, and then all of a sudden, Palpatine does this little tornado spin across the table, and
yeah, they still couldn't figure out, like, okay, well, Dooku's gone, but yet they still feel that presence somehow. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, well, what the heck? But see, now you don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah, and I wish they had dealt with that a little bit. That's the only thing that
In the movies,
Yeah, I mean, in Revenge of the Sith primarily, when they
Right.
figure out that Palpatine is a Sith Lord, it's kind of like it just, I don't know. There's two things on my mind where that's concerned. Like, one, it was almost like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, let's go arrest him. And then on the other hand, it was almost like they just sort of accepted and blew through it too quick. You know, there was no, I mean, granted, the Republic was essentially falling apart as all this is going down, but at the same time, I don't know, that just felt a little bit forced and a little bit too quick for me.
Well, I think we got that from, of course, we the fans know what's going on the whole time. However, but yeah, I can understand from the point of the Jedi, like, okay, but if you kind of really think about it, they've always kind of had suspicions about Palpatine. They just couldn't prove anything.
Well, that's true. I mean,
that's
they
what
did
they
start
said.
out the movie because they wanted to spy on him because they thought that he was, it's like, look, man, there's something not right about this guy. We need you to go in and...
Yeah, and that's what Anakin had the bigger problem because it's like, well, this guy's kind of like my father figure, and, I feel really uncomfortable about doing this, and I think this is wrong. And then, of course, Palpatine knew it. He was like, yeah, they sent you to spy on me, didn't they? So it's still like...
That was such a great scene,
Yeah.
too. Didn't they? Didn't they? Just like the sand people. I mean,
Yeah,
he's just
yeah,
like going,
yeah.
I was like, all right, I see what you're doing. But what was funny about that, too? I think it was the thing that really shocked me the most about that particular movie. And that is, it's kind of like, oh, wait, you're the Sith Lord? All right. And Anakin immediately draws his lightsaber on him.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay. I did not expect that.
Well, I mean...
I expected him to be a little bit more torn and a little bit more like, maybe I'm going to let this, and that was how he was going to become Darth Vader, is that he was, but his resolve was there. I mean, he was like, in fact, it was Mace and Anakin weren't arguing about the fact of, no, we have to let him go. It was more like, well, I want him to stand trial, and this other guy wants to kill him, and that's, but nobody was denying the fact that, yeah, you're done.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, Anakin is looking at it from the standpoint of, he knows what the Sith are. He knows what they can do. And, this whole time, just like Yoda and everybody else, they're all feeling it. So if he's the cause of it, and he's like, well, dang, that's probably going to make him even more upset because it's like, dude, like, I've been around you all this time and you've been, it's like being betrayed by a best friend. It kind of just infuriates you almost because, like, well, why would you even do this to me or us? And I think that's really what kind of set Anakin off.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it basically, he was feeling the betrayal, and I think the anger, and we all know that Anakin is totally prone to anger.
Mm-hmm.
The anger of the betrayal and him hiding this, and he was really, because, he felt the effects of the Sith Lord, too. I mean, it was Maul that took Qui Gon away, and Qui Gon was kind of the first father figure he had.
Yep.
And then all the other trouble that he was causing. And then he probably started thinking back to Dooku's whole thing, like, oh, yeah, of course you wanted me to chop his head off because you wanted me to turn to the dark side. And he felt very terrible after that and really conflicted and torn and all that stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that was a natural reaction. But still, I was a little bit shocked, though, that it wasn't even like, kind of a slow, wait a minute, you're the, it was just like, oh, he ignites the saber. It's like, okay, taking you in.
Yep.
It was like, that was awesome.
And I mean, honestly, that's the only Palpatine saving grace because of the fact that he had that knowledge. Because honestly, had Mace and Anakin went after him, it would have been over for him.
Yeah.
But,
I don't think
had that
Palpatine could have stood against Mace and Anakin.
No. And I think that's one of the things that he knew that. So he's like, well, even when he was, I have the power to save the ones you love. Like, he kept reminding him of that. Because,
oh, yeah. I mean, again, this goes to show his cunning and his everything. And again, in the face of danger, because remember, he did not use all the power that he could have when he used it.
Mace.
Yeah, well, I mean, when he was trying to convince Anakin, he was letting Mace, to a degree, best him a little bit. I mean, I do believe that Mace legitimately beat him at at points during that duel. But then there were other points where he started to just take advantage of the situation where he could have retaliated, but he didn't. And once again, this is a little bit different from what we're used to seeing from a traditional Sith trait, let's say.
All right.
You know, these are slightly different things, and I think that that's a really great, that was really good writing to me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But, I mean, it's one of those things, though, that when he does unleash his full power, then you become to appreciate it more because you're like, wow, this guy could really do a lot of damage, but he restrains himself. And, you know, patience and then following that, restraint. Restraint's not really something that's a Sith trait either.
No, they actually want you to unleash everything.
Yeah, it's very highly emotional, you know, react, use your anger, use your hatred, use your fear. It's basically taking all the negative emotions and using them to your advantage and using them to empower you and get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, like you said, which really takes this conversation somewhat full circle, is that you had a situation where the Jedi who rely on peace, who rely on meditation, who rely on all of these things, if you keep them in an agitated state, it's going to disrupt their ability to truly commune with the Force, to truly experience the Force, let it flowing through them, and, you know, on and on it goes.
Yeah, you really get that from that line Yoda gave in Empire when he's training Luke, and he's like, you know, he was trying to, like, quiet your mind. I forgot how he actually put it, but he's like, you know, when your mind is at peace, you know, and he's kind of just teaching them, like, you can see clearly what's going on when you're at peace. And one of the things that, you know, I always took from the movie Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee is that it was this one scene when he had that one kid show him a kick, and then he was like, you know, what was that? And he was like, you know, do it with feeling. So then the kid did it again, but he did it angrily. And he's like, no, I said emotional content, not anger. There's a difference between the two. So you can have your emotions into it, but not be subject to it or let it go over to the point of anger. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like one of those things with the Sith that Anakin never really kind of mastered, was the fact that he will allow himself sometimes to go overboard. And usually it was Obi-Wan to have to kind of like bring him back, like, no, Anakin, chill out. You know, you can't, just other ways of doing this. So, yeah, bring it full circle. Yeah, I think that was just masterful of Palpatine's, because he basically just created a situation to where, okay, the Jedi are going to take themselves out almost. I mean, that's one of the brilliant things about it. It's like, I don't have to really do anything physically to them. I can just create a situation that's going to take them off their square or move them out of the position where then now I can just kind of do what I do.
Well, and this is interesting too, because Ronaldo brings up a point that one of the things that I was going to talk about, actually. He says, I don't know if it was ever detailed in canon, but Palpatine was very clever in sending Maul to kill Qui Gon Jinn. Speaking of that, I was going to use that duel between Maul and Qui Gon to perfectly establish the difference between the way the Sith deals with things and the way the Jedi deals with things. If you look at when those force field things came up, and they had to take a timeout, let's say.
Catch their breath.
Right, catch their breath. Maul is just
stalking,
huffing, and, you know, stalking, and he's just kind of like working himself up, and you could tell, like, he
can't wait.
Yeah, he's just like in a tizzy almost, like just trying to, you know, channel his anger and everything, and just sneering at him and all that. Qui-Gon, on the other hand, basically is like getting down into almost like this kind of yoga meditative type pose.
Take a knee, buddy.
Right, exactly. You know, and he's just all like, hey, yeah, you know, I'm just going to chill here and quietly think. But again, that's what he's doing. He's basically centering himself, bringing himself at peace. He's essentially channeling and strengthening. Both of them were actually strengthening themselves in the Force, but they were doing it in the very different ways. One for the light side, one for the dark side.
Yep.
And I just thought that that was a really cool way, and something I never really thought about before either. But in talking about this, it reminded me of that scene.
Oh, yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes, actually. I always love that scene because you definitely see it, but then you also see if you could continue that further, Now when after Qui Gon has been struck down, now you see Obi-Wan. He's bouncing, like he can't wait. As soon as those ratios open, he's going at it. But I think that the thing that what happened with Maul is that he wasn't expecting that type of anger from a Jedi.
Right.
He wasn't expecting that type of power coming from a Jedi, but I think Obi-Wan eventually kind of got himself together. But you kind of see that he kind of left himself open because of that rage and anger, and that's how he got shoved down that little shaft thing.
Yep. Ronaldo goes on to say, if I can get this thing, if Qui-Gon were still alive, Anakin's path would have been very different. Yeah, I think so, too. That was one of the things that you and I actually have speculated quite a bit on this show.
Oh, yeah.
And, even just in conversations that we've had, that if Qui-Gon, and this is one of those things that really you have to look at, what caused the fall of Anakin really was just multi-headed issues.
Mm-hmm.
You had the death of Qui-Gon, which was the first thing. Obi-Wan was still trying to learn how to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, and I think we actually went over this once when we were we were doing some sort of review, but I remember that we were talking about that Obi-Wan becoming like a brother to him actually in some ways did him a disservice. Because it sort of blinded him to certain things that as a teacher, you have to see. And Obi-Wan got a little bit more emotionally invested.
Yeah.
And I think that actually caused more harm.
Yeah, I think he always saw, but I think he just kind of just like, we see it all the time. Like, there he goes again. He's just like, he kind of just accepts that's kind of how Anakin is. And he's dealt with but he always knew Anakin was good at heart, but he just didn't know how badly the fear and the hurt that he has experienced affected Anakin that deeply. Whereas Palpatine knew that because he would have those conversations with him.
And Palpatine exploited it.
Of course.
I think it was even more than just, I don't know if Obi-Wan didn't know it so much as I think that what Obi-Wan was trying to do was more or less like sweep it under the rug. He was trying to.
Well, yeah, he knew Anakin had those dark traits about him. But I think overall he knew Anakin's heart was always in the right place, and he always wanted to do what was good and what was right. The problem is with him, just like with any kid, or anybody who's talented, is that, they want to unleash their full thing, and they're like, you don't have to. Simplicity is the key to brilliance sometimes. And the thing with Anakin is like, well, I have the power. Why don't I just go ahead and just do it? And it's like, well, yeah, you could do it by brute force, but then here's the ripple effect of that. You're only thinking about the moment. And that's kind of where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan differed a lot of times, because even in the Phantom Menace, you saw, well, if you would just listen to the council, you'd have been on the council by now. And, it's like, as wise as Qui-Gon was, he still understood. And that's what made him he was kind of like the first Luke Skywalker in a way, because he kind of already understood, like, all right, there's some things about the Jedi that are great, but there's some dogmas that, I think that we are pressing too far. And I think that's causing issues, or will cause issues at some point. And that's why he was kind of seen as that rebels, just like Quinlan Voss, another one, was it Quinlan Voss, or was that
For what?
He was in the Clone Wars. He was kind of like that tracker. He was a
Yeah,
Jedi. That was
Quinlan.
Quinlan Voss. Okay.
Pretty sure it was.
Yeah.
Ronaldo probably knows.
So I think once again, like when you're looking at like the whole dogma of the Jedi, Qui-Gon kind of realized that everything doesn't have to be so black and white, and he did acknowledge the gray areas. Obi-Wan was just kind of very starch and dogmatic. Like,
well, this is what cracks me up. This is why when he was seeing Anakin, because if you think about it, first he has a master that he's kind of like, okay, I got to reel this guy in. It's like, master, if you would just do what you're supposed to do, you'd be on the council. You would just listen to reason. Okay, now he's the master. Now I get to control. It's like, Oh man, now I got a student that's more like, I mean, this
He's just
guy
like
got
Clark.
it both ways pretty
Yep.
much, you know? It's like, and that's part of the problem too, is that I think that in some ways, Obi-Wan tried to be a little bit looser because I think that was one of the things he ultimately learned from Qui Gon was like, okay, there's a time to break the rules. This is one of the things that I thought was brilliant about Dooku's move in Episode 2, when, you know, he was like, hey, you know, you can't trust all the Jedi or whatever. Qui-Gon knew that to be true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm sure there's a part of Obi-Wan that goes, yeah, you know, Qui-Gon, that's pretty much how he felt. We know that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really good way to get to him because Obi-Wan was basically like the true believer. He was the one that was pretty much, until it was too late. I think toward the end, he started to see some of the weaknesses of the ultra dogmatic views of the Jedi, but by then it was too late.
Mm-hmm.
But for a while, I think he was just trying to do everything right, you know, do it by the book. The book was written for a reason. Let's not, you know, even
Deviate
though...
too much from it.
Right, but I think that a lot of times people unfairly criticize Obi-Wan because they're going by the films. I think if you actually watch
the Clone Wars,
yeah, because I mean, look at Satine, man. He's fallen in love with her, and he's kind of breaking a little bit of those rules too. He wasn't quite as dogmatic as what everybody accuses him of being. You know, he's
I mean, the thing about Obi-Wan is that he's had the way he's learned his lessons are very interesting because I think when you see him under the tutelage of Qui-Gon, he's always okay, you know, starch, dogmatic, you know, that type of vibe.
Yep.
Qui-Gon kind of shows him some things like, well, okay, you know, you don't have to, you can bend the rules. You don't have to necessarily break them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where Obi-Wan kind of started to understand, like, okay, I can bend but don't break.
And he was doing that. He was doing that.
And he would do that from time to time, and he understood that, you know, at times you have to.
Sure.
Because everything is in black and white. But then now you start looking at when he takes on Anakin as an apprentice, and that's kind of where it kind of fixes those problems within him because now he has someone that he has to kind of reel in. But especially with Anakin being as powerful as he was. And that's the thing. He's super powerful. So it's like, okay, once you kind of like get him to a point where he truly recognizes his power, it's going to be very hard to manage that because he knows it's different when you kind of like into like, well, you're special and blah, blah, blah. But when you realize like, no, I'm really better than everybody out here. You know, it's a different mindset.
Well, that's one of the things that I thought was actually really cool, phenomenal even, about the whole Obi-Wan Anakin duel, is that Anakin started thinking, yeah, man, I'm the guy, you know, I'm even better than you. And Obi-Wan's like, no.
Not yet.
Not yet. And, you know, I think Anakin was a little bit surprised that Obi-Wan was pretty much matching him move for move.
Mm-hmm.
Till, I mean, a lot of that was a draw. And really, I mean, Obi-Wan eventually had the advantage, and that was it. It was pretty much because of Anakin being the child of the Force and all that other stuff, he was starting to become the zenith of his power, and now he's using some of the dark side, which if you really start to think about it, really shows how powerful Obi-Wan actually is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people don't really take it to credit how powerful Obi-Wan was.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And I mean, I think that a lot of people really don't look at that duel in the proper perspective, that Obi-Wan is actually super powerful.
Yeah, because the fact that he's dealing with someone who's younger than him, faster than him, more powerful, if you really think about it, I mean, I guess from a certain point of view.
Well, from the technical standpoint that he's a chosen one, he's pretty much getting to the point to where he's just entering the zenith of his power.
Mm-hmm.
And he's essentially still have a little bit of the light side, but he's also given himself to the dark side. So he's really amping up his power a little bit. It's like being amplified through the dark side of the Force. So really, the fact that Obi-Wan was able to not only match him, but the
only way he was able to best him was because, once again, I think he learned that whole lesson from Maul, is that, see, Anakin and Obi-Wan was trying to warn him, I have the high ground. Like, he told him his plan. But because that arrogance and that anger supersede, he couldn't hear or he couldn't see. They're like, okay, if I jump, like, yeah, I'm leaving myself vulnerable. I'm leaving myself open. And that's why Obi-Wan kept trying to tell, look, I have the high ground, dude. Don't do it. And he did it anyway. It's like, well, you know.
Well, and again, and this is the other thing, and this is where Obi-Wan was going to beat him. They were pretty much a match as far as force powers go, but Obi-Wan was still the superior strategist.
Yeah, exactly.
And he kind of led the duel in such a way to give himself the advantage and basically say, look, man, you know, it's pretty much over for you. We have some nice consolation prizes that we can give you if you just see the person at the door. You know, I mean, you know, please take this gift bag and parting gift and all that, and we'll see you next week. But essentially, those were the kinds of things that, you know, you have to look at. Let me get to some of the chats. My mom first, of course, says Palpable. I think she means Palpatine is my favorite villain. He's ruthless. Yeah, and that's, you know, the thing is funny about that is that I always, and I still in a way kind of drift towards Vader. But I think over time, I've really have recognized as Palpatine is more actually the superior villain.
Yeah, he's the definitely superior villain, but I just think people just like Vader just because of just his disposition and just
his disposition, and you know, let's face it, his outfit's cooler.
Yeah, I mean, he's cool and
he's got a cooler costume, you know.
And it's the voice, the whole. I mean, the whole thing is just like, you know, no one wants to be this old wrinkly man, you know. It's but it looks like, you know, like the little skin on your elbow or something like that. Like, that's Palpatine. But, you know, when you look at Vader, though, he's like this tall, he's this big, booming voice. You know, he has this presence when he walks in. But when you really look at Palpatine, though, this guy, like I said, there's no part of villainy that he hasn't touched. From manipulation to just sheer power to cunning to being to smart to, I mean he's everything wrapped in one. And then some.
Yeah, he's the guy.
He's the guy.
He's the guy. Ronaldo's got a bunch of points here. He says Obi-Wan is more like an older brother. Qui Gon was the father figure that Anakin needed.
True.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. He goes on to say Obi-Wan is a bit more loose with the rules, which is, you know, also true from the standpoint of Qui-Gon probably was still the loosest. But Qui-Gon, whereas Qui-Gon would ignore the rules, Obi-Wan would follow the rules loosely, and there is a difference.
Definitely.
He also says Obi-Wan defeated Maul, Grievous, Anakin, and cut off Savage Opress's arm. The guy is very good. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly. And this is something that we talk about a lot, too, is that if you actually watch Obi-Wan during the Clone Wars, not only do you see where he's a little bit looser and he's bending the rules more and he's not quite as by the book as what you would get if you just reviewed him through the films, but, you know, this guy has done some stuff.
You know who
and of course he has the high ground.
You know who Obi-Wan kind of reminds me of? A Jedi James Bond.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because when you kind of look at it, like, sometimes he gets his butt kicked around, but then he kind of finds some weird, cunning way of getting out of it. And then this is his whole kind of, like, when he shows up, even in the Clone Wars, the animated movie, you know, how he kind of, he stalls while that one guy, so he's just like, well, you know, I think that you should take our slaves and you should feed them. Like, he's delaying, and he's very charming, though. You know, when he shows up, hello there. Like, he has this whole charming vibe to him.
You know, charming is actually a really good word for it, honestly.
Yeah,
I never really thought about it, but yeah, he's kind of...
He kind of has that Roger Moore thing going on for him, and it's kind of hilarious because I think that's why people just kind of like him, because he's always kind of calm. He's loose. He's not really stressed out. And... you know, even when he's in danger, you know, he looks at Anakin sometimes like, well, this is your choice. You know, this is what you picked for us to do.
Well, the funny thing, too, is, like, they're crashing. It's like, well, we still have half a ship. You know, he still has, like, the total sense of humor. And,
yeah, it is very Roger Moore.
Like, he's not really worried about it. Which, of course, by that time, it's like these guys have faced death so much, it's kind of like, okay, it's pretty much hilarious.
Yep. Ronaldo says James Earl Jones has the best voice in film history, along with Peter Cullen, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the reason why anything that James Earl Jones does is just legendary. And it's what's funny is it's not like he's a voice actor, really. He doesn't change his voice or anything.
No, it's just...
I mean, Mufasa is Vader.
Yep.
And
King Jaffe. Yep, from Coming to America. And then even in the show, one of the best ones is Fences, man. Like when he gives that whole speech.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness, man. You're just like... I mean, you literally like start shaking just because it's almost like your dad yelling at you. And you're like, I don't have to like you. And, you know, you're just like, uh-oh.
Oh, I can imagine, like when you were, if you were his kids.
Oh man, and
he would get mad. I mean, you know, it would just be like,
yeah, he could be very intense, man. And it's just like,
yeah,
all right,
it's just one of those things that and that's what actually makes him particularly a good voice actor, because then you can put his voice over some mean and threatening looking person like a Darth Vader, and it's like now you had the perfect villain. You got the perfect recipe for a great villain at that point.
But then at the same time, what's also amazing, and this is also to Ronaldo's point, is that when James Earl Jones, when he plays someone that's more tender, loving, and caring like a Mufasa, or like we saw that episode in Frasier, when he's speaking like, isn't she beautiful?
Oh, yeah.
Like he just has that way of just delivery where it's kind of like, man, like he could switch it on and off. And
a very gentle, you know.
And it's very gentle, but it's always passionate. And whichever way he chooses to use it, you still hear, even he did, I think I let you hear that, if I didn't, I have to let you hear it on YouTube. He does like this whole introduction to the University of Michigan for the football season.
Oh, I've seen it.
Yeah. And even then, just listening to him do that, you're just like, you get chills. You're like, man, like this guy can do anything with his voice.
You know what I was seeing on Facebook, which was hilarious? They actually have him. You know how you can get those audio Bibles?
Oh, he's writing.
They've got James Earl Jones reading the Bible, man.
Gotta get it now.
I mean, I'm just like, I've got to hear that.
It's Vader reading the Bible.
I mean, it's just gonna be too weird for me.
He's got to read all the red lines, though. All the red parts in the Bible, he's got to read those.
I mean, it's just going to be like there's certain passages you could go, yeah, you could totally hear this in James Earl Jones's. But then there's other ones where you can. And I think it's great that he's actually doing a lot more of this kind of stuff. Like he's doing voice work. Because I always thought the same thing. Like he should actually get into, like the whole audiobook thing. Mm-hmm. He could clean up doing that sort of thing.
Of course.
And that would be the kind of thing that he would want to do now because, you know, he's
age.
Pretty much up there.
Yep.
And so that's a really good thing. That's why I always say if anybody wants to keep making Vader a character in any of these future Star Wars, whether it's a Disney Plus series or a movie, you better get this guy to say every word imaginable. Mm-hmm. Because it was something that my friend Doug was pointing out, and that is that even though they have had other people do the voice, and it's convincing enough that you can go, okay, cool, fine. It's still something different when James Earl Jones actually does it.
Definitely.
And it was kind of like something that you brought up too, because it was really funny. Like if you listen to his voice between episodes 4 and 5, and like 5 and 6 are fairly similar, but yeah, I mean, 4 and 5, it's like kind of different. And then one of the things that, even though it's unavoidable, one of the things that I always thought was kind of weird was that in Rogue One, it's kind of like he sounds a little bit older and weaker and stuff, and you're kind of like, well, this doesn't really line up with.
Right.
This would be more like if he had survived Return of the Jedi. This is what you would think that.
Yeah, he was.
Ronaldo
says, Vader reading the Bible, that is the best thing I have ever heard in my life.
I know, man. I mean, it's just.
Yeah.
It's classic, and it's just, I mean, they have, like, I remember I had this one copy. Oh, I can't remember. There was this one Bible app they have that I had where they had, like, these two different guys reading it. And one guy's a little bit more Shakespearean sounding. And, I mean, it's great. Like, you can this guy could read you the phone book and you'd be totally into it. But James Earl Jones would just be like that next level up there, man.
Definitely.
But since we are in the James Earl Jones state of mind, think it's time to move on to our next segment.
Yes.
What do we got?
Next, we have Duel of the Fates.
Saw you read that in your best Vader voice.
Not,
Next, we have Duel of the Fates.
Not quite. Not my best one, but
Not your best one.
it's in there.
It was good. It was good. So, who are we pitting up against this week?
So, last week, we did Luke and Vader as far as comparing like those lightsaber endings. This week, who do you think was more powerful? Mara Jade or Leia?
Can I just take a second to say that I don't know where this Mara Jade depiction came from, because I know how she's drawn in the books and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But man, I'm really attracted to Mara Jade.
I thought you might.
I was kind of looking at her. I know.
But, they're black pants and they're white pants this time. But.
Man, I was just like looking at and you know what? If they got her, whoever she is, to play Mara Jade, I'd be all about it. You know, because, there is a similarity there. The way Mara Jade's drawn in the books, it's almost like, oh, man. I almost want to say like, who would play her? It's like, there's a couple actresses that have that general look.
I always thought about the girl from, what is it called? Unhappily Ever After?
Oh, Nikki Cox, yeah.
Yes, Nikki Cox, yep.
She could do it. I could almost, she'd have to bulk up. Like Kristen Stewart might be able to do it if you dyed her hair red. There's like a couple of, some of those typical actresses that you see in a lot of these movies that have that sort of look.
Is Rebecca Remain Stamos?
She could probably do it again. Well, she did dye her hair red for Mystique, right?
Yep.
So, that would work. Amber Heard would actually work. She was in Aquaman. She played the redheaded chick.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not just saying that because she had red hair in there, because I think she's normally like blonde. She's a little crazy because, she sued Johnny Depp for domestic violence, and she's really kind of loony. But, hey, I think she's got actually the perfect disposition and everything. If I were to cast Mara Jade, it would probably be Amber Heard. That would probably be at the top of my list. I'm sure there's others, though, that, would fit the bill or whatever. But that would be it. And that's basically when I saw this photo that we used, I'm like, you know what? As the reality is, it's probably just somewhat. It's probably not even, exactly. Somebody doing a cosplay thing. I'm sure it's not even actually an actress. I don't know. I don't recognize.
Ronaldo says, I understand you. Every time I see Mara Jade, I say, Luke, you son of a bantha.
Yeah, well, that's what was kind of cool, too, is that, a lot of people, in case you don't know, well, first of all, if you don't know who Mara Jade is, as there might be, I think most people that are watching the show probably know who she is. But if you don't, she was introduced in the Timothy Zahn trilogy, basically Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command, what was basically considered episodes 7, 8, and 9 before Disney came along.
Right.
In the expanded universe, that's where she was introduced. And she was basically the Emperor's hand, which was kind of like an assassin. And her whole thing was when Palpatine was killed, she wanted to get revenge on Luke Skywalker. Eventually, they fall in love, they get married, they have kids, the whole shot. But she's like, she would use a lightsaber sometimes. She was like really adept at fighting and strategizing and all kinds of stuff. She was
pretty powerful.
Very powerful. To the point where in hand-to-hand combat and things like that, Luke had almost no chance. He had to use the Force against her. But it wasn't like all this stuff happened in one book. It actually dragged on for a while. And she ended up becoming a fan favorite character. And she popped up in a ton of other books. Because one of the things that was cool about that is that people would, when other authors would come in and write books for the expanded universe, a lot of people would pick a lot of, I almost said Thrawn, Zahn's characters and use them. So even though somebody like, say, Thrawn wasn't in every single novel or anything like that, Mara Jade certainly was in a lot of them. Talon Card, Kip Duran, all these guys, all these people that basically originated in that Zahn trilogy ended up becoming main characters throughout the entire expanded universe. So that brings us to this particular segment, which is in, I guess, period, right? It's just who's more powerful.
Right.
That's a really difficult question to answer. Because on one hand, I would almost have to say Mara Jade. But then on the other hand, I guess it really depends too. Because if you go by the expanded universe timeline, and then you go by where we see Leia around the same time, I would actually, in new canon, here's how I'm going to answer this.
Okay.
In new canon, I'm going to say Leia. In old canon, well, it wasn't really canon. In the expanded universe, I would probably say Mara Jade because Leia didn't, she trained, but she wasn't really so much of a combatant. In the expanded universe, she basically was really more using it for her politics and diplomatic stuff and everything else. I mean, she did train. She knew how to fight. She knew how to do all that stuff. But the bottom line is, if Mara Jade was starting to take out Skywalker himself, Leia wasn't really going to be much of a threat to her. On the other hand, in new canon, though, you see that Leia's a little bit more powerful. And, you know, she was training. I wouldn't even say this if it wasn't for the fact that if you actually go to the Rise of Skywalker and you see those flashbacks and stuff like that, only because she was starting to use the Force. But I guess if somebody tied me down and said, no, you can't do any of that cheesy stuff. You got to say, overall, who is the most powerful? I would have to say Mara, only because even at the time of right after Return of the Jedi in new canon, Leia was basically just training with Luke. And she was just developing her Force powers. So, I mean, I would have to say, you know, overall, that I'd have to give it to Mara.
Okay. Let's see. Ronaldo says, in this case, I think Leia wins. I feel like she is wiser than Mara, although it is complicated. We have not seen the full power of Leia in canon.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. I mean, because on one hand, you can make the argument that Leia would definitely have the ability to, because she's Luke's sister. Certainly, if she trained in the Force. In fact, there's a lot of Lucas even acknowledged that Leia actually, if she were trained, would be more powerful than Luke. And I remember you and I even talked about that at length at one point, because she's not as reckless. She's more, you know, she basically came up from the time she was a kid in politics. She has wisdom. She has poise. She has logic and strategy and diplomacy. And she has all these skills that she could use, that if she developed her combat skills and then her Force powers, she'd be pretty much unstoppable. But the problem is, and that's why I hesitate to say it, is if you're just going by, because, you know, the other thing, Ronaldo, too, that you have to look at is the fact that we haven't seen Mara Jade in new canon yet. So we really don't even know what they would do with her. Because that's one of those things. I mean, look at what they did with Thrawn. Now, granted, pretty much almost all of Thrawn's attributes are intact. All they did was they played with the timelines a little bit, and they made him maybe a little bit less villainous than they did in the expanded universe. But that said, you still have to basically look at it and say, look, guys, I mean, it's one of those things that they haven't really brought Mara Jade in enough, well, at all, you know, that you could say definitively. So the problem is they changed Leia in the new canon a little bit, and they haven't brought Mara Jade into the new canon at all. So it's a really apples and oranges comparison. So you almost have to either do it one of two ways. You either have to go compare them both in the expanded universe, or you have to just try to go expanded universe Mara in the way she's depicted in that versus Leia as she is now.
I think I'm going to side with you. I'm going to go with Mara, simply because for all the reasons that you just said. Leia, I think she had the potential to be more powerful than Mara, definitely. But if we're just going based upon what we got, it's still going to be Mara. And the reason why is because of her master, Palpatine. Once again, you're sitting under one of the brightest strategists.
Well, that's another.
And then on top of that,
point
you
too.
know,
she was trained to fight Jedi. She was trained to fight all these people, and look at what she was doing against Luke. And I just can't help but think that. And there's a lot of aspects about it I don't remember. You got to remember, man, this is almost 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That, don't forget, 30 years ago was 1991.
Yeah.
That's when the first Zahn trilogy came out. So pretty much like 30 years ago, and, you know, so figure like maybe 20 to 30 years ago is really when I'm heavily reading the expanded universe.
Yeah, Ronaldo says, I haven't read the Thrawn trilogy in a long time, but didn't Mara kill Luke's clone before marrying him?
Yeah, I believe that did happen, actually. And I mean, even in other battles and stuff like that, you know, Mara was basically like beating him. And I mean, at first, I actually didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of like, I don't really know if I like this new chick coming along and defeating Skywalker, because the problem is, like, look, can't we just get Luke to be powerful? I hate it when they do that. They finally get a character to where they're powerful enough, and now you just want to see them come into their own, and then it's like somebody else comes along, and it was almost like what was happening to the Mandalorian to me.
Right.
But, you know, that didn't.
He also says, that seems a bit strange to me personally. I don't know if I would date a girl who killed a guy who looks exactly like me.
Well, I mean, but if he was an evil version of you, though.
But was he an evil version?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, I mean, because you also have to think in terms of how would you even react, right? Because it's funny how we'll talk about stuff like this. We'll talk about it as if it's normal. I mean, you really have to think about, like, how would you even live in a world where there were clones of you running around and, you know, stuff like that? I mean, you would probably have issues with that. The fact that she killed an evil clone of him probably would endear her to him more than anything, because it would really, I know I would really hate it if there was a clone of me running around.
I would too.
Yeah, it's like, right? I mean, two of you?
Yes.
I mean, what would really be hilarious is to get the clone to co-host the show one day. So it's like, I'm Eric Vansel, and I'm Eric Vansel. I mean, it would just be kind of strange. It would just be really weird interacting with a clone of yourself. So you had to put yourself in that kind of a mindset. I mean, this is about as nerded out as we could probably get. But you have to, a lot of times, especially when it comes to fantasy or science fiction, because there are certain themes that have been repeated in each one of those genres, we have come to accept them almost as if they're real, but we don't really stop and think about the implications of it.
Right.
And I think that that's definitely the case here, is that I don't really know if Luke would be too happy about it. Now, granted, I do understand that even in this, and this is where Lucas went a little heavier on the sci-fi than on the fantasy when he introduced cloning in the first place. I mean, cloning is not a fantasy-based trope, you know? This is more of a sci-fi kind of thing. But I think that even if you're used to that, you would still have a problem if it wasn't something you authorize of there's a clone Luke Skywalker, especially given the fact that, if I remember correctly, that clone was bad.
Mm-hmm. It's like Bizarro.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, Ronaldo finishes things up here by saying, I think Mara will appear in canon at some point, but I think she will be very different. I wonder about that.
Yeah, me too.
I wonder about that, because I would almost argue that if they brought Mara into new canon, I would almost argue that they wouldn't change her that much. That it would almost be like what they did with Thrawn. I don't think that she would be changed all that much. Now, granted, there are certain things that have to be changed. Maybe. Some people would point to the fact that, she wouldn't be in a relationship or married to Luke Skywalker, for instance. But that's not necessarily the case. You could have had that all happen before The Force Awakens. Mm-hmm. And then something happened to where either she was killed or they just got a galactic divorce or,
Galactic
some weird
divorce
thing.
story.
Or maybe that's the real reason why he fled to Octo and was just like, you know what, I'm done with women.
She put him out, so.
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of like, he's sleeping on the proverbial couch or whatever. I mean, these are the kinds of things that is kind of nice about the fact that The Force Awakens and Return of the Jedi are so far apart. Is that you can actually bring in, I remember actually making the argument that you could, well, first I made the argument that you could have made the sequel trilogy Zahn's trilogy and used Rey, Finn, and Poe and just replaced Han, Luke, and Leia with those characters, and the story could have been pretty much intact. But then I went a step further at one point, too, and said, you know what? You could bring the Zahn trilogy, because remember, it takes place like right after Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
You could still do that with Han, Luke, and Leia. Obviously, you'd have to recast them, but you could take that storyline and still do it, and it would still leave the canon of the real 7, 8, 9, the sequel trilogy. It would still leave that untouched. And in fact, if they really wanted to do a soft reboot of the sequel trilogy, they could do that. Now, people would have to get past the fact that they'd have to recast Han, Luke, and Leia, but
All right.
I mean, I would almost, to see those stories come alive, as sad as it would be not to have Han, Luke, and like Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill in it, I think I would accept it better. The only other way they could do it is maybe make it animated movies.
Yeah, you could do that.
And then just use their voices and then get a Carrie Fisher sound-alike or something. And then
Right.
that would give you the best of both worlds. You'd still have Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill at least, and maybe Billy D. Williams. And, you could still do that. And if you did those as like an animated feature film, which is something that really, even though Lucas did it when he owned Lucasfilm, that's something that Disney has not explored yet. And I'm really kind of shocked.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it may come. I mean, I think, we get in series and things like that, and I think we might go into that. But I think because of the Clone Wars, which was highly successful, which is essentially, you can say those almost like feature films.
Well, you could say the same thing about Rebels, and I'm sure some of the, Bad Batch probably.
Yeah, Bad Batch.
But what I'm saying is getting away from episodic animated series and go more for animated film. And you're right, that could be the next step. But, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm glad that they moved away from animation and more into the live action, because that's really what we wanted.
Yeah, I think that's what fans really know for Star Wars right now, is just that live action.
Yeah.
Ronaldo also says that if it's revealed that Kylo killed Mira or something, God protect the soul of that poor Lucasfilm worker who came up with that idea, because the fans will murder him.
Well, I mean, the fans are going to murder anybody at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the fans, and I mean, we'll probably talk about this. I actually don't know what we're going to talk about for Monday's show yet.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. I'll tell you, I mean, watch, we'll probably end up just deciding this like right on the air, but I'm leaning towards maybe doing a little bit of a High Republic kind of thing.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. And if you guys have any suggestions about maybe what we should talk about on Monday, because remember, Mondays are usually, they're either reviews or they're reactions or they're single topic, informal
topics,
shows that we just, maybe we bring friends on or something like that, and we just kind of chat about. They're actually really informal. They're not like our Friday shows. So if you guys have any ideas, let us know in the comment section, preferably before Sunday. Or if you're watching us live right now, you can put it in the chat. But I'll bring this up a little bit because it has been discussed. And you were talking about it before the show, is the whole idea of Robert Downey Jr. playing Thrawn, which is nuts. Whoever came up with that idea should just be like drawn and quartered. But at the same time, if they announced it, I would accept it. It's like I'm not, in spite of my previous comment, I'm not so against it that it would ruin it for me, only because I know that Robert Downey Jr. would actually study the character and really give it his all. And, you know, they've made mock-ups and stuff like that of what he might look like if he played the character. And it was acceptable. I thought it was a little forced, though.
No pun intended.
I mean, again, who they should actually get to play Thrawn is the guy that did the voice. Madge Mikkelsen?
Mad Mikkelsen.
You know, they should get him to do it. Or they could get Michael Fassbender. I think would make a fantastic...
That's the one who played Magneto in the X-Men movies, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
I think that was him. You know, they could also... They could get Benedict Cumberbatch to do it, too.
Doctor Strange.
No. I don't think he was Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
Look it up. He was Khan in Star Trek, this is so embarrassing. The second one.
Into Darkness?
Yeah, Into Darkness. Yeah, that was it. But, I mean, that's one of those things, though, that it seems like they're trying to bring in a lot of these expanded universe characters, and that's how it relates, is the fact that they could bring in Mara Jade. They could not necessarily destroy the continuity of the sequel trilogy. They could softly reboot, like we were saying, 7, 8, 9, by taking Timothy Zahn's 7, 8, 9 and actually creating it. Obviously, they wouldn't call it that, but you can call it Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising. And nowhere did it really say it was episode 7 or 8 or 9, except maybe in the book. I think they may have done an opening crawl. You know, like Ronaldo said, it's been like 30 years since I've read those myself.
Well, I think that would be cool, man. Honestly, if they just start taking the books that people love and just turning them into movies, there you go. I mean, you could start making these one-off stuff just based off the books, and you got source material, so you don't really have to find, like, writers, per se, to get the story. I mean, you have to come up with the dialogue and, you know, how you're going to have them deliver it, but, I mean, the story's already there.
Well, and they don't even have to do that. If they don't want to do it with the expanded universe, they can certainly do it with the new canon books. Look at how many wonderful books there are, and I actually think that would be best served as animated movies. That way you don't have to worry about, you know, any of the actors or stuff like that. I mean, you can literally do that. Because in all the Padme ones, where you have, like, the whole Queen Shadow, Queen's Peril, and then, of course, you have, I think it's just called Padme. You had a bunch of novels that either she was the main character or she featured very prominently in. And you could just get the woman that voices Padme in the Clone Wars.
Right.
You know, the beautiful part about it is because you had all these main characters that we know and love anyway, generally represented in the Clone Wars. I mean, obviously, except some of the original trilogy characters like, say, Han Solo, you could do it. And you can make them as animated films, and there you go. That would satisfy the fan base. That would give you something else that you can exploit. I thoroughly believe at some point they're going to move the High Republic into television and movies.
Oh, yeah.
They're setting this up too much. You know, and even in the beginning of the comic, which I'm sure they probably do in the book too, they actually give the timelines now of each of the eras of Star Wars. You know, I mean, off the top of my head, I know you have the Old Republic, you have the High Republic, you have the Fall of the Jedi, you have the Reign of the Empire, you have, you know, they actually gave names to each one of these, and they showed you what movies and stuff fell under those ages. So you could tell they're setting stuff up. You know, they're starting to set up eras now, to the point where they're trying to even name the eras that, you know, we're familiar with already, that we really didn't even, I mean, we didn't call it anything.
Right. But yes, that is Doctor Strange.
Okay. Ronaldo says, I wanted them to adapt, they're using Vong and the New Jedi Order books for the sequels. Yeah, that would have been cool too. They couldn't have done it really for the sequels. They would have had to do those for, say, if they were going to make a 10, 11, and 12 or something. And you were going to need a lot more than a trilogy for that, too. I mean, honestly, they could have cut off a lot of the fat, though. The Yuuzhan Vong series was like a 21-novel series. And really, you could condense that down. That's true. There was a lot of subplots. There was a lot of things that were... Some of the stuff was cool. Some of the stuff not so much, but most of it was unnecessary. Of course, you'd have to change the whole idea of Chewbacca being killed by a moon falling on him, but...
Yeah, right.
You know, he says, yes, they gave the timeline in the book, which is cool. Yeah, so they're really trying to sell this whole New Republic thing. So I don't really think that it's just going to live in books and comics.
Yeah, the High Republic is...
They're definitely introducing that in the books and comics, which I think is actually a really interesting move, because the fact that they created a trailer for the series is a highly unusual thing. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this came from Star Wars themselves, it's like, I mean, since when have they ever created a trailer for their books? I mean, maybe in the expanded universe they may have at some point. I don't remember. They might have done it for Heir to the Empire and, you know, the Zahn trilogy or whatever. I'd have to go back and look. But when have they ever done that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot of things that are, are coming out regarding the High Republic. And I think, we kind of speculated about this before, that this is the new direction, which is good because now you can start out fresh. You're not tied to the Skywalker saga. You can get away from that and create a new world within Star Wars that, you can branch out with these brand new characters. And now no one has all these expectations of them. And I think that's the thing, because now whatever you put out there, the fans just have to accept that that's what this is. Whereas with the Skywalker saga, you're always thinking about, well, Luke wouldn't do that, or Han wouldn't do that, or that's not Leia. And, you're tied to that because everybody's so rooted. But, with something brand new like the High Republic, the only person you have to really worry about is Yoda.
Yeah, which, by the way, I'm really happy that they made Yoda a Grandmaster in this.
Okay, good.
Because that was one of the things, I remember we did a whole show on it, actually, about where Yoda was going to fall in this. I was really happy to see that he's introduced. He's one of 2 Grandmasters that were introduced in this thing, which I know this is a topic that's coming up later in our show, so I'm not going to do it all now. But they are moving in the right direction is the point that I'm making with this. Mm-hmm. So I'm really hoping that, honestly, we get High Republic movies and we get High Republic series. Because I think that they're basically setting this stuff up for a reason. I don't think that this is just going to live in books and comics. On the other hand, if it did, you could almost say that would be a good way to sell more books and comics and say, okay, this is going to be exclusively there. But I can't imagine an entire era of Star Wars living strictly there. But then again, I would have said the same thing about the Old Republic, and look what happened.
Right.
So it remains to be seen. But what about you guys? First of all, do you like the direction that they're going? But regardless of that, when it comes to who's more powerful, it's like I have to bring it back to this now. Who's more powerful, Mara Jade or Leia? We know that it's kind of hard to compare these two because one resides primarily in the expanded universe, and the other one, we basically have very different characters in a way. When we're talking about Leia, there's the Leia of the expanded universe, and then, of course, there's the Leia of the new canon. And even though there's a lot of similarities, there's enough differences where I would understand that it's difficult. But take a stab at it. Leave a comment in the comment section and let me know, who do you think is more powerful and why? All right. You ready to, well, you were way ahead of me. I saw you were taking a drink already.
Well,
All right. I see how it's going to be. Since you're thirsty, let's do it, man. Let's go to the cantina. All right, so this is where we actually talk about a lot of our general Star Wars topics that come up. And since there's something coming up every other day, it seems, especially with the High Republic coming out, we now have The Light of the Jedi, which is the first book of the High Republic. And, now, of course, we have the first comic issue that's come out. But now we have some confirmation thanks to another, I'm pretty sure it was another book in the series or something, right? That was talking about how Yoda knows R2-D2. We were always wondering, why didn't Yoda seem to recognize R2 when Luke and R2 landed on Dagobah? But it looks like that Star Wars has confirmed, albeit a little softly
Right.
that this is true. And I know it came up in a book, but I'm trying to remember which one it is.
Yeah. So the book is how funny. It's called From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back. It's written by Jim Zub, and it's called The First Lesson. And it showcases a perspective as Luke and R2 arrive on Dagobah, and they pretty much get into the fact that they do knowing each other. It says,
Oh, yeah, I remember the excerpt of the book where it talks about, he's talking about, oh, yeah, it figures that Luke would have Anakin's old droid. And
yeah, of course, the boy had Anakin's old droid with him. Such cycles of fate no longer surprise a 900-year-old Jedi.
yeah.
So he's like, okay, so that's basically he recognized, R2.
Yeah, which I actually think I think this is a cool thing. I honestly think that it's about time that they start to, albeit softly again, fix some of the plot holes that Star Wars has. Because there's a lot of questions we have. Of course, this ties into, in fact, we did a show a couple of weeks ago where we did, I think it was the top 5 unexplained or unanswered questions of Star Wars or whatever. Now, we didn't do this one, but we did do, why didn't Obi-Wan recognize R2?
Right.
But this could very easily have been in the list, too, and I think that we even mentioned it as kind of like an honorable mention. It wasn't like an official one where we had a graphic and all this stuff for it, but I do remember us talking about it. Because, again, one of the problems that Lucas had is that he had a rough outline, but unfortunately, as you guys all know, he was making up some of this stuff as he went along. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we had the Luke and Leia kiss. We had, some other inconsistencies, like, oh, Darth Vader killed your father, and then it was sort of like they had to clean it up. Well, that was true from a certain point of view. It's like, yeah, okay, man, it's called, you didn't know you wanted to make them related, and now all of a sudden you did, so now you have to figure out how to explain this in Return of the Jedi, which makes sense. But again, these are the kinds of things that I think sometimes unfairly, but sometimes, like in a case like this, it's fair. This is a fair question. There's some plot holes that everybody just likes to look at where you just have to say, look, man, it's a movie. I mean, it's going to, like, one plot hole that I thought was really cool, that the way Lucas explained it, was, why does the prequel trilogy look so new and high tech and all this? And, of course, the answer is because it was shot in 99, 2001, or 2002 and 2005. That's the real answer.
Right.
Is that ILM has a lot better effects now. But Lucas knew that he had to come up with some sort of an in-universe answer of why. And then that goes into what you started to say was, well, it was pre-war, everything was kind of new and regal and, majestic and all this. And then when you have the Empire taking over, it becomes utilitarian. It's no different than when I went over to Romania. It was explained to me that you could tell the original Romanian architecture versus the more utilitarian once the Soviets took over and it became predominantly communist. One of the things that happened was you saw a lot of the architecture being very functional, just like I said, utilitarian. It didn't have any real aesthetic or anything like that. It was just
there to do what it
very
needed to
industrial, and exactly. And that was basically what had happened when the Empire took over, was that a lot of the beauty and the architecture and stuff was replaced by things that were more functional versus aesthetic. So there's things like that, but then there's other things like this, where you're having characters that spent quite a bit of time with each other that are acting like they don't even know each other. And that was always a problem for a lot of people. And it's nice that the folks over at Star Wars are like, you know what, let's start to try to fix some of this, because they're able to, now that they have enough of a picture, because they've made the sequel trilogy, they've gone a little bit. Now they're starting to even go back before the prequels officially in canon. So they have enough where they could actually start to
shape stuff.
shape things a little bit, exactly. Because part of the reason why I think that they didn't is they didn't want to paint themselves into a corner any further.
Right.
But there's other elements of it to where it's like, guys, I mean, come on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad. Like I said, I'm glad that they've, fixed those problems because, of course, that's one of those big glaring things.
This was a big one. I mean, honestly, this is a really big one. There's this. There was, of course, the Obi-Wan R2. What are some of the other ones that we can think of that
Lando wearing Han's clothes?
Yeah. Well, that was a big one too. And then I think we ended up explaining that with he just had those outfits in his closet and they're kind of roughly the same size. So
they had to hurry up and get out of it. It's not
they had to hurry up. Exactly. Well, that was one of the things you brought up that I didn't really think about was the fact that, look, man, they didn't exactly have time to go to their local Kohl's or whatever
and pack a bag or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And, let me go back and to Bespin that I just fled.
Right.
And let me go pick up a couple of things. Or here, let me just type into my wrist and get Lobot to meet us with a couple of capes or something on the way out.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm glad. Like I said, I'm glad that, we get a chance to. I mean, I really did love that scene, though, Empire, because I thought it was just hilarious about how, R2's trying to he's kind of trying to quietly bring that little arm out to snatch that little light back from Yoda, and Yoda takes a stick and he's all like beating him with it. It was just very playful.
And what's funny about that is that when you read this recognition, it puts that in a new light.
Mm-hmm.
Because now it's almost like a familiarity.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is that even though you have confirmation, and I mean, I know this is kind of splitting hairs here, but you had the confirmation that Yoda knew R2. And you've got to imagine that R2 recognizes Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, we recognize now, thanks to The Mandalorian, thanks to a lot of other canonical things, that this species is not exactly the most common in the world.
Right.
I mean, you basically had Yoda and Yaddle, and we hadn't seen any evidence that there were any of these other... Because, usually, like, if they visit spaceports or something like that, you'll see, oh, look, there's the... what do they call it? Like Icthorin or whatever Hammerhead was.
Oh, yeah.
Like Ithorian or Thorin or something like that. But yeah, or like the Rhodians or the Tredorians or...
Quarren, you got...
Yeah, your Quarrens.
Mon Calamari.
Right. You would see other beings of this species running around somewhere.
Yeah, you have like your Admiral Akbar, but then there's like other Mon Calamari.
Right, exactly. Kaminoans, Geonosins. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Throughout all of canon, you see all this stuff mentioned. You never see... We don't even know what Yoda's species is.
Yeah, I mean, you had a whole planet of Wookiees. I mean, we've never seen another Wookiee until we got to Kashyyyk. So it was like, oh, okay.
Well, there was Lumpy and we saw him. You just we saw him. You just don't want to acknowledge him. See, that's the difference. But I mean, though, that's the kind of thing though that makes Star Wars, I think, connected and fun. Is that, and I think more realistic. And I think the Mandalorian's actually doing a lot to further that. Is that, look, you're going to see these familiar beings in other areas.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing that I really love too is that they did this a little bit in The Mandalorian, but they've been sneakily doing this in other stuff too. And I have a feeling that this is going to be compounded as time goes on. Is that usually if you have a hero that is of a particular species, what's been the tendency is that everybody of that species would be somewhat noble. But what I like is, you say you have a Mon Calamari. You might have a Mon Calamari that's maybe not so noble and might actually be evil and a criminal. Just because Admiral Akbar was amazing doesn't mean that everybody in his species is like Admiral Akbar, in other words.
Right, exactly. Just how we saw the Quarren, in the Clone Wars, they were kind of very aggressive and very kind of nasty.
Yeah.
But even the Mandalorian, they're the same way. Sure,
and I mean that, even on Earth, right? I mean, we got people that are really good, but we got pirates too. We got, criminals. Not everybody who's human is, cool just because one or two people, might be. So, I mean, you have to take it into those kind of perspectives. Ronaldo says, luckily, they finally explained it. Now tell us if Han shot first.
Yes.
Well, here's what's funny about that, too. You know, that keeps going down this insane rabbit hole that just amazes me, because now Lucas is trying to sell the idea that he always meant for Greedo to have shot first. And in fact, I guess if the idea was they were supposedly shooting at the same time or something weird, but Greedo shot missed and Han's hit, and he wanted to use the special edition to make that a little bit more obvious. First of all, I don't know if I believe that. No. I think that's a little bit of revisionist history.
That's a bunch of crap.
It is, but I also think that if that is true, that's too bad, because I think the scene works best when Han shot first.
It does. It always works best because it's to his character. You know, he's a smuggler. He's and he's very, once again, very cunning, very kind of sly. And, you know, that's Han. You know, it makes sense. And he knows, and you got to think about it. He knows why Greedo is there. It's not like, you know, they just happen to like, I mean, yeah, they did kind of happen to bump into each other, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, like I know, because that's the whole reason, like Han is like, okay, this whole trip can really save our necks. So it's just like the fact that Greedo shows up and he's just like, look, I'm about to pay you. Just give me a second. I just made this trip. I got to drop this kid and this old man and these couple of droids off.
Well, that kind of brings up
I'm
another...
good. And we're good here. And then, well, why don't you just give it to me? Like, well, I just take your ship. Now, of course, once again, especially once we see Solo, you know, we see how much Han, of course, loves the Falcon. And, you know, so it's like, okay, my ship over my dead body. You know, so, and like I said, Greedo is a bounty hunter. We know that's what he's like. It's no different if the man if Din Djarin showed up. Like, okay, I know, or Boba. Like, I know why you're here. So my thing is, okay, I got to get the drop on you before you get the drop on me. So,
well, I think this is part of the reason why bounty hunters got sort of that evil, because Greedo obviously was a bad guy because he was against Han, who was the good guy, loosely speaking, of course.
Right.
But I mean, these are the kinds of things that I really like, is the fact that you have this attention to character. This is what would be in this nature. There's thought into it. It's not just,
right,
you know, man in white hat shoots man in black hat kind of a thing.
Right. It's almost kind of the same thing like we talked about with Palpatine. Is that like, okay, the fact that he's that cunning, he's thinking that in depth about how am I going to do this, and into that character is what I'm saying. So with Greedo and Han, yeah, it's like, okay, they're both kind of criminals in their own respect, I guess. So, or I won't say criminals, I'll say they're both kind of shady in their own respect. So it just makes sense that, you know, okay, if I know you're shady and you know I'm shady, well, I got to figure out who's going to be the real Slim Shady. No, just but
exactly. I was thinking it. I was singing it in my head, I have to admit.
But no, I have to figure out like, okay, well, I have to get you before you get to me. I mean, that's just like, it's almost like street rules. You know, it's like, okay, I'm going to get you before you get me. So it makes more sense. And the fact that you see Han kind of just, you know, diverting his attention, like, look, I don't have it with me. And then he's like, his hand is like under the table. He's taking the blaster out.
Yeah, you know what's really weird about that? You know, is that if you look, he does his other hand and he kind of like puts it over here while he's, I don't have it with me. You know, it's kind of like diverting here. Look over here while I have a blaster over here.
Exactly.
But the thing that's interesting to me, this has always been kind of cool, is that, you know, Han's probably been a little bit less than honest with some of these people, right?
Of course.
Well, the thing that's really funny is that he was actually telling the truth. It's like, look, man, because what was hilarious is I always thought this with Empire Strikes Back, too, is that it's kind of the rebels' fault that he ended up the way that he ended up with Jabba and all that other stuff. Because if you remember in Empire Strikes Back, he was like, listen, yes, I'm going to come back, I'm going to join, but I got to get this price off my head. I got to go see Jabba. I got to give him this money.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I just got to take off. And then, of course, well, you know, you're a good man. We'd hate to lose you. And it's like, he was really legitimately trying to pay the money.
Mm-hmm.
But each time he got sidetracked.
Right. Well, that's why I love the fact that even in The Force Awakens, when he's talking to the Conjure Club and he's talking to all those other guys, and he's like, look, don't I always make it? Yes, I do. All the time. It's just like, oh, yeah. He's like, well, you told him. No, I didn't. Then all the guys show up. He's like, hey, I was about to, like, you can see him getting caught up. Like, crap.
I mean, there was actually a lot of elements about that. First of all, I really love the fact that he was probably the funniest in that movie.
Oh, my goodness.
Like, that was probably the most comedic Han Solo has. As funny as he is in all the movies,
yeah,
that's probably most comedy from that character that we've had.
Especially, like, sometimes it's not intentional. Like, that's not how the Force works.
That's like one of my favorite lines, especially because, Han was never really all that
keen on, like, the whole idea of
First
the
of
Force.
all, he didn't really believe it or any of that stuff anyway. And then he wasn't really around for a lot of the stuff. We're sitting there going, well, this whole saga is about the Force. But if you really look at all the scenes he was in, he had very little contact with it.
Yeah, even in Solo.
Or experience. Right. So
that's one thing I love, too. Like, they didn't put that around him. So he still had that image in his head of, like, what are you talking about?
yeah, even though what's ironic is, unbeknownst to him, he's dealing with a bunch of Force users all the time. He had no idea that Crimson Dawn was headed by Darth Maul.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what else happened in between that, like when he was working with Jabba and stuff like that.
One of my favorite Han lines still from The Force Awakens when he was talking to BB-8, he's like, move, ball.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was just one thing after another. And then, of course, the other thing that was hilarious, too, is here's this guy, obviously, like, way older than he was, but he's still kind of, it's almost like that guy who never grew up, who's doing the same thing, when they're, like, 70, that when they were 18.
The Al Bundy thing.
Yeah, but it looks a little bit more sad. And that's really the thing that was striking to me about The Force Awakens is he's back to being a smuggler, but that doesn't really fit him anymore.
Yeah, because like you say, he's been this whole war general.
He's been the war general, the hero, and that's kind of how we're used to seeing him. And to see him again the way that he kind of was for episode 4 when we meet him, it's weird somehow.
That's true.
And I thought that was actually a brilliant way of capturing it, that Leia goes back to what she knows, Han goes back to what he knows. That was something that you really didn't expect. And I thought that was every bit as realistic as what happened with Luke in The Last Jedi, even though you can make the argument they could have handled it differently, or, maybe they could have made him a little bit more disillusioned. Like, one of the ways I think that they could have solved the problem is to had him be more heroic and everything in 8, maybe had him become more disillusioned in 9, because once he was heroic and did what he was supposed to do and everybody's counting on him, it's almost like it's conjuring up memories, and they could have done some stuff. And granted, it would have been a little bit tight because you only had a couple of movies to do this in. But at the same time, character development's a funny thing. Like, I was talking to Sam today, and, I was asking him if he saw Cobra Kai Season 3, which he did, and he liked it. He didn't like it as much as the first 2, though, because he thought that a lot of things were rushed in Season 3. And even though for me, I was totally fine with it, and I thought that the character development was amazing in it, for him, there were certain things like Hawk's transformation and things like that even though they were foreshadowed, and he admitted, he was like, yeah, I get that they were foreshadowed, but it should have been more obvious and it should have been a little bit longer. Or maybe what you could have done was make the episodes a little longer. But the point that I'm making is that it's really difficult to satisfy everybody with character development because some people need more character development and some people don't need as much in order for the same outcome to happen.
Right.
So you can have a disillusioned Luke. Some people would need a little bit more lead time for that. Other people would be okay with a couple of scenes. See, but the problem is you can't, as a creator, as a filmmaker, you have to do what it is that you feel you need to do for basically the sake of the movie you're making. And that's, I think, where things get a little crazy. But when you're talking about something like what we've been talking about, where you're dealing with actual plot holes, I think that that's where it's a little bit different. That the fans do need a definitive explanation. You know, you can't have two characters that know each other, like R2 and Yoda, and they suddenly don't know who they are anymore.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of people that have been trying to explain that. Well, there's a lot of astromech droids. Well, there's, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it's like, come on, man. I could deal with that maybe if it's a scene here and there. Just like I know another thing that, you know, we talked about too was the fact that it was a little convenient that Anakin built 3PO.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was closing the universe a little bit. I don't know. It's like, it's cool, but I don't know if I really
Needed that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think that it could have been done without. Now, Ronaldo comes in with, look, your worshipfulness, let's get one thing straight. I take orders from just one person, me. Han Solo. And then I always wanted to tell that to my boss at work. Well, good luck with that.
Yes.
You know, let me know how that goes.
Hope you have another one lined up.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you might want to. Yeah, there would probably be. I'm trying to think of a Star Wars line where they're begging and pleading, but you know, basically, I think your boss would do the whole. You know, we hope that you will lose your job honorably. But these are the kinds of things I think that, you know, you just have to take into consideration when you're dealing with characters like this, where you just have issues where you have these glaring plot holes that need to be fixed. There's some that I think that they can let go, like the Anakin 3PO thing. You know, it's a little convenient. It's a little like, okay, whatever. But I mean, you could sort of hang with that.
Mm-hmm.
You can hang with the fact that Anakin, you would think that Vader, though, would have recognized him. And they did make that canon, by the way, where there was a comic where, you know, he actually, I don't know, I think he found him in the Bespin junk pile or something. I don't remember where it was, but they had a little bit of a scene. So we'll have to see. But let us know in the comment section below, or, you know, if you're chatting or whatever, let us know what you guys are thinking. If you like this video so far, you know, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification button so you know when we release other videos. And, yeah, don't forget to like the video. Okay, what do we got next?
All right. So next we're talking, you actually kind of prefaced this earlier, but next we have more Grandmasters that have popped up in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I read the comic, the first issue, before we went on the air with this thing. I'm trying to remember that other Grandmaster's name.
So we have LaRue and Vader.
Vader, that's it. Vader's the one they introduced, along with Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of, first of all, like I did say when I prefaced this whole thing earlier, was that I was really happy that they actually had Yoda as a Grandmaster. Let me just get that out of the way right now, because one of the concerns that I had was that Yoda maybe was only going to be a master. So I remember there was some article or something that they were alluding to that Yoda might not be. I mean, he still might be a little different from what we're used to, but the idea of him not being a Grandmaster only a couple hundred years before The Phantom Menace was ridiculous to me. I mean, don't get me wrong, 100 years or 200 years is a lot of time, but still. And the way that this species ages, obviously, is very slow. And I like the way that they drew Yoda as younger, but he doesn't look significantly younger.
Yeah, my only question is, you know, I don't know, did they address who's actually leading the council at that point?
Not really. They basically had this Vader guy and Yoda, and it really wasn't obvious. I mean, offhand, I would say Vader probably was, but I don't even know if it, you know. That's the interesting thing about this whole Grandmaster thing, too, is that we're used to having one of them.
Right, and originally, I don't think Grandmasters really existed originally when Lucas kind of created this.
No, I mean, he referred to Yoda as more or less a Grandmaster in the Force, but you'd never hear that term
Right. You just heard
in
more
universe.
in
basically.
universe, right. You just heard Master, Padawan, and of course Knight.
Yeah, it's just that you would assume based on Yoda's position, because the question always becomes,
But who controls the Masters?
well, where
basically?
was Mace basically in all this? Like, he's kind of a master, but is he at Grandmaster level? But he's second to Yoda. I mean, they were never really clear on the hierarchy of this whole thing. I mean, you knew that Yoda was the head of the council. You basically figured he was a Grandmaster. But they really only started throwing that term around with Luke, believe it or not. And that's why a lot of times, once Luke basically surpassed Yoda in power, they thought he was the first Grandmaster. In fact, the expanded universe kind of wrote him that way. Like, he was almost the first Grandmaster of the Force. But then they sort of went back on that, and then they retroactively made Yoda that way. And then I think that even if you go into the whole Star Wars databanks or whatever, Yoda's referred to as a Grandmaster. And now you've got it all over the place, because you have obviously the High Republic now. You have these novels where you're introducing a couple of Grandmasters, and you're saying that Yoda's one of them. So
Yeah, because even Palpatine addressed him as Master Yoda.
yeah, but he didn't say Grandmaster.
No, that's
Yoda.
what I'm saying. That's my point. Like, they didn't acknowledge it in canon, like as far as the films and things like that. But then, like, they kind of retroactively.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Masters, almost like Mister, for
almost like Master, Lady, Lord.
yeah, Master Robin, Master Grayson, Master Wayne, that kind of thing. But basically, the idea though, as a rank, and I think that that's really what it comes down to. It's like, is it really a rank? Is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. It's kind of you know what? I kind of liken it to kind of to masonry a bit, because there's definitely like 3 degrees in masonry, but then those who achieve like 33rd degree, they're kind of people who are not in the organization kind of assume that they're like way up here above everybody else, and that's not the case, but it's kind of perceived that way. So a lot of times, even when we're talking about like Mace, he may just been like the cream of the crop of when it comes to the Masters, as it were. And then, of course, Yoda is still like several notches above him.
It's just kind of weird though, because again, it's like they've never really. It's like you said, they've always had this as kind of a title, but it's never been like a true ranking. And I think that that's where it gets a little strange too, because it's only very recently that we even learned on the Sith side of things that the Sith Padawan is an acolyte, and you have some of these ranking type of things in there too. Ronaldo says, if memory serves me, no other Grandmaster has been mentioned in the book, at least not as far as I have read. Knights and Padawans only. Yeah, it's the comic book where Yoda and Vader are actually introduced as Grandmasters, which I thought was really weird, like right out of the gate. And this is another thing too. I really wish that I need to try to finish this Thrawn book, because, by the way, it's really good. If you guys haven't read it, you should really check out Thrawn Ascendancy, Chaos Rising. It's a phenomenal book. It basically takes place in the Outer Rim. It deals strictly with the Chiss, with Thrawn. There's no other main characters or anything like that in it, but it's amazing. I believe it's going to be the first of 3 books that are going to be written, but I need to finish that so I can get into the High Republic. I forgot that the High Republic was coming out so quick. For some reason, I thought it was going to be the end of January. I don't know why, but I thought it was going to be the end of January, so that's why I went ahead and bought both Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril, thinking that when Thrawn was done, I can go into those. That's not going to happen. I'm going to dive right into the High Republic book, which is a fairly long book, too. It's actually about as long as the Thrawn book is. So,
yeah. Just to kind of go back to what you were saying, as far as rank. So it says in this article, what's interesting is that the High Republic doesn't just confirm 1 Jedi Master, but 2, which can change how fans perceive the rank. Given that the new era is set hundreds of years prior to the prequel trilogy, it's meant to showcase the Jedi in their prime. It's possible that the Jedi Grandmasters of the time carried out different responsibilities, which Yoda took on himself during the prequel era, which is now known as the Fall of the Jedi. All in all, though, having 3 Jedi Masters is more in line with what the Jedi are meant to be. Sure, the Jedi Council is ruled as a collective body, but Yoda and Mace Windu have much more power than the rest of the Jedi Masters. Having 2 other people of the same rank as Yoda would allow the Jedi to rule more like a committee. Considering what happened to the Jedi when Palpatine came to power, moving away from their roots and more towards an authoritarian body is partially responsible for the Jedi's downfall.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, I would just be hard-pressed to find... And I get it that with the High Republic, they're trying to differentiate it, like... Because one of the things that they kept saying over and over again was like, look, this is the Jedi in their prime, their zenith, which really kind of surprised me because I would have thought that the Old Republic would have been, especially the way it was characterized in Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah.
So it's weird that they're saying that this is the Jedi in their prime, but it could very well be because, they don't really have adversaries right now like the Sith or anything like that.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is like one of the, it's like this lizard Jedi master that's training Creve or something like that. Like I said, I really blew through this book.
That's the thing. We got to get used to all these new names.
I know. I got to get used to these names. And the name of the lizard Jedi master escapes me, but her lightsaber was kind of like a scimitar.
That's sweet.
Yeah. So I mean, but yet Creve, I think that was her name, who was the Padawan, she had a double-bladed saber that was very similar to like a little bit kind of like Maul's, but
more like Rey's.
Well, yeah, but we didn't see both.
Rey wasn't.
Yeah, Rey, she made it out of her staff, but it was like it was just the one side. It wasn't like a double-bladed saber.
Right.
This is a double-bladed saber, but the thing is that the blade is thinner.
I'm thinking about Evil Rey.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, Evil Rey. And it was sort of like that, but I mean, it was like a little bit thinner, and then the hilt and shaft and everything were a little thinner too. So it was a little bit more like a, like a pole, exactly. What it kind of reminded me of? If the Beskar staff
or a
lightsaber, that was really more the diameter of the blade. It wasn't that thick at all. It wasn't like what we think of when we think of a lightsaber. But then you had this other one that was more like a scimitar. So it's really going to be interesting because I have a feeling that we're going to need a lot of the material before we're fully immersed into this world. Because if you think about it, you have a book and you have a single issue of a comic out. It's really hard to immerse you into this new world because for all intents and purposes, it is. I mean, it's great. Ronaldo says, Eric, out of curiosity, do you find that fairy that appears in the comic annoying? Yes. You know what it reminded me of? It was a little bit like, I don't know if you ever saw the Flintstones, but it was kind of like the Great Gazoo. But kind of like a weird or there was that South Park episode where like they had corn, like the Scooby-Doo gang, and there was like Niblet, that little weird like fairy chicken like mascot, like Niblet. Yeah, that's kind of what this thing was like.
Like Woodstock.
It was like this little fairy thing that was just
great. Star Wars has Tinkerbell.
Yeah, exactly. It would make jokes, and it would, because Ronaldo was saying that it was for him, and yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird. It was, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna get into this one or not.
Yeah, he said. Ronaldo also says, when I read the preview, I thought it was a Jar Jar's ancestor in some way.
Yeah, it was. And again, it provided a little bit of comic relief, especially when the fairy brought its wife or girlfriend in, and they were. I mean, it was done in such a way that it wasn't quite as intrusive as, say, Jar Jar. Because once Jar Jar came into the picture, he was like the movie. That was the problem that I really had with him. You know, it wasn't even so much just that his character was annoying. I could have dealt with that. What bothered me was the fact that he was like the star, the central figure in the whole film.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, could somebody shut this thing up? I want to hear more about the Jedi. If you think about it, we had been waiting like 30 years to get the backstory of Obi-Wan, Vader, you know, this whole thing. And it's like, okay, we get essentially this overgrown Muppet basically becoming the star of the show and turning this thing into like Sesame Street or something. That's why I think a lot of people had a thing against Jar Jar. It wasn't, if the character had been more of a secondary character that had just popped up in a couple of scenes, I think it would have been okay. But the fact that he was a central figure, he was so prominent. And, you know, in every little scene, they had to show how Jar Jar was reacting to it.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Like, who cares?
And that's my biggest fear about this little fairy thing, that I'm not really sure what its place in this universe is. Because if you think about it, it's like I started to say, we're just now stepping into this whole unknown era. You're not really going to get a feel for it just based on a comic and a book. The book maybe a little bit, because like I said, it's a pretty long book. It's got a lot of pages in it. So it's not like it's only a 200-page book or something. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot that it gets into. And I don't remember exactly how many books there are in this particular series. Is it like a trilogy
3
or something?
Yeah, there's 3 books. Let me grab that.
Yeah, find out how many books there are. I'm pretty sure it's a trilogy. I know the comic is going to run for 6 issues. And I know they had the first 3. Like, you can buy the first one now, and then the next 2 are on pre-order. I've done that. But they do plan on doing 6 issues, I believe, of this particular run. So it really makes me wonder how many, how many books, how many comics are they going to put out in this world, or is it going to just be, okay, this is the High Republic series, and we're just going to keep putting out different story arcs in it? It's going to be really interesting. Ronaldo, how many pages are in the actual book? So right now, I've got the ebook, and it's showing me like 800. And it's not like I have some like giant font size either. Ronaldo also says, at least that fairy had more dialogue than the Knights of Ren. Which is kind of sad. I mean, really, and this is, again, if you really want to see where the Knights of Ren are cool, you got to read the Rise of Kylo Ren comic. They're amazing. And there's that one time where they tried to take on Luke. Oh, yeah. That is like one of the coolest. See, this is the Luke that everybody wanted in The Last Jedi, by the way. Mm-hmm. But, unfortunately, Lucasfilm has decided that if you want to see all the things that all the casual fans want to see, you got to read books and things like that. Which, again, I get. I really do think that the books are a central part of everything, and I think that everybody should read them. I just don't think that it should be necessary, though. Once again, if you introduce something in a film, you should resolve it or explain it in a film. So the Knights of Ren were definitely mentioned in The Force Awakens, because the way they brought them up in The Force Awakens, you thought, okay, these guys are really going to be kind of featured pretty heavily in The Last Jedi, and they weren't.
Yeah, we got Light of the Jedi, Test of Courage, and The Great Jedi Rescue.
Okay. So far it's just basically a trilogy then. Mm-hmm. Is Claudia Gray writing any of those?
Yes, Claudia Gray has... where's her book?
I know she was supposed to write one of them.
Yeah, she's written one of them. Trying to find...
Because and that's why, again, I think it's interesting that they're starting to put these things out, and it makes me wonder if they're going to start to expand it even further. They got the comic, they've got the books.
I'm sorry. So it's Light of the Jedi. She writes the 3rd book.
She writes the third book.
Yeah, Into the Dark.
Okay. So that should be pretty cool. I'm looking forward to that. And it's really going to be interesting to me. Ronaldo says he also has the ebook. It's like 660 pages. Okay. Yeah, so I mean it's pretty long. It's like mine saying that it's like around 700 or 800 pages. It says 660. So it's definitely a healthier, thicker book. So, these aren't short books, which I'm actually glad about, too, because I do think that this first batch, you really have to introduce us to this world. You have to give us some sort of a picture of not just the characters, not just, the good versus the evil and all that stuff. We actually need the world building. We need to know what this world looks like. We need to know what it feels like. And because you can't show it to us in a movie or a TV show or something, you're going to have to do a good job explaining it to us through the books.
Definitely.
All right. But again, what about you guys? Are you guys really charged up about this whole High Republic thing? Do you have any of the books? Like Ronaldo's got one of the books. I've got one of the books. I'm sure Daryl will soon have one.
Yep.
Let us know in the comment section what you guys are thinking about. And if you've read it, let us know that too. And let us know your thoughts. All right, what do we have next?
Next, we have Kevin Feige's Star Wars movie has gained some big traction.
Now, this is really interesting to me because when I saw that, and you showed me this article and stuff like that, it was another one where you really didn't hear much. They did that really big announcement, and where Lucasfilm basically laid out, like, here's all the movies that are coming out in the foreseeable future. And I noticed that Kevin Feige's movie was conspicuously absent. Now, one of the things that's interesting is last week, we talked about Patty Jenkins possibly losing Rogue One because of the performance of Wonder Woman 1984. What I've been reading about that now, it looks like she's still doing it, but there's rumors that Aaron Sorkin is actually writing it, which is a really odd... I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that would be cool. But it does show you, though, that you have to be careful. And it was kind of like the point that you made that they don't want to handle, they don't want to hand over because in our conversation, I had temporarily forgotten. This is like the next movie we're getting.
Right.
So you can't mess this up. So it makes me wonder if maybe they're like, you know what, let's get that Kevin Feige thing going too, just in case. Because that way, if for some reason the Rogue Squadron, I keep calling it Rogue One, if for some reason the Rogue Squadron movie goes rogue, then they'll have like some other movie that they could put in its place really quick. But tell us all about the Kevin Feige movie, Daryl.
Well,
while I have my cantina drink here.
My pleasure. So, Kevin Feige, of course, being, the big man with the Marvel Studios.
Oh, yeah.
Is, dipping his hand into the Star Wars world. We already kind of knew that. We haven't heard much about it, but we did get confirmation that the director for it is going to be the same person who is directing the new Loki series. And that director is...
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't really heard that much about that series either. I know it's been...
I saw the trailer for it.
Is Tom Hiddleston playing him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Michael Waldron.
Michael
Waldron is the one who's been tapped to write. He's not directing. He's writing Kevin Feige's Star Wars movie.
What's the premise of the Loki series? I'm trying to remember now.
Well, that's on our Marvel show. We can't talk about it.
Right, that's head-to-head a Marvel show.
But what a lot of fans, and this is the cool part, so this is what I'm really kind of interested in here with Ronaldo and anybody who else may be, watching the rebroadcast or watching on Facebook may have to add to this. But a lot of people are thinking that he's doing the Vader movie.
Oh, yeah, the Vader movie. Ronaldo does say, I wonder if Kevin Feige's movie will connect with Taika's and Patty's. Possibly Taika. I mean, I don't know. Who's to say? But I don't think it's going to tie with Patty's only because the whole Rogue Squadron thing is kind of like its own deal. Yeah. I mean, it could. The only thing I could say is maybe it'll do the same time period because I'm really wondering what time period this is going to be in.
Well, like I said, if it's the Vader thing, it's probably going to be, of course.
In between 3 and 4.
Or, yeah, 3 and 4.
I mean, it's got to be. I mean, again, I would really love to see stuff, even though I know there's not a whole lot of time to play with. I'd love to see something take place between 4 and 5 or 5 and 6.
Definitely.
There's a lot of stories that have come out in the comics between those time periods that have been fascinating. Or, give me some more stuff, say, between Return of the Jedi and The Mandalorian. I wouldn't mind seeing that. Now, granted, I know there's a lot of series that are coming out that are starting to hit that time period pretty heavily, but there's still room. And as far as Taika's movie, again, we're not even really sure where his is taking place. But it does make me wonder, though, with Kevin Feige's movie, I wonder if this is why all these rumors of Robert Downey Jr. playing Thrawn are coming up, too.
Well, yeah, that's why a lot of people are thinking that Feige's the one who's doing that. He's bringing Robert Downey Jr. in to play Thrawn. But one of the tweets that's kind of gone out that says, no, Robert Downey Jr. will be put in Feige's Star Wars movie, assuming that the movie isn't the culmination of the Thrawn story they're building up to. Favreau and Filoni know to cast Thrawn more carefully than just to hand it to some A-list actor.
Yeah, I honestly don't. I can't see that. I mean, and the fan base is split once again either. You do have some fans that are like, oh yeah, sign me up, blah, blah, blah. But then you have a lot of other fans that are just like, you know what? No, this is like the wrong choice. And it is. Like I said, I mean, I love Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
And if he did end up playing Thrawn, I would give it a shot, and it would probably be okay. But he's not the right person to play that role. I could tell you that right now. He's just not the one who should be playing that role. And I think that it's probably going to be introduced in a Star Wars series, not a movie. Because it was brought up in The Mandalorian.
Right.
Which means that you're
commit.
Probably looking at either Ahsoka or you're probably looking at not even Rangers of the New Republic. He's either going to pop up in Season 4 of The Mandalorian, or 3. I'm already way ahead. Season 3 of The Mandalorian, or Season 1 of Ahsoka.
Right.
Ronaldo says, whether it's a Vader movie or not, I think Feige will draw a lot of inspiration from the comics, just as he's done at Marvel. I would hope so. I mean, either the comics or the books. I would really like to see somebody.
Well, especially with those Vader novels. I mean, they're done by Marvel anyway, so that would be really kind of cool if he did do a Vader standalone. And especially the ones that you've shared with me about him going back and finding the handmaidens for Padme. And
oh yeah, that's this recent series. In fact, they're still making them right now.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like that whole him kind of going back and kind of figuring out all these different things, that's just kind of, infuriating him, and finding out Palpatine knew the whole time, and, all these different things. I think if we're going to, like you said, if we're going to do a Vader movie, it pretty much has to be now, while you still have James Earl Jones around to do the voice. And maybe that's what they're thinking. And then especially if you have Hayden Christensen around, remember that he's been, getting back into the suit, so we don't know.
Yeah, you're right.
So
the
that's
whole Obi-Wan thing.
The whole Obi-Wan thing. So
if Obi-Wan ties in maybe in a year or two.
Right. So if you got a Kevin Feige movie that's coming out that's kind of centered around that, I could see why, Hayden Christensen is kind of getting back into the suit to play Vader.
It would be interesting. I mean, it's just going to be really interesting because one of the things that I think is really weird is that they never mentioned his movie at this big event they had like 3 weeks ago.
Well, I think that's probably because they probably didn't have a lot of things in place yet. And
Yeah, it's also probably because Wonder Woman 1984 hadn't been released.
So I think that was the thing. I think that hadn't, and especially for something like a Vader thing, like I said, they're going to keep that under wraps until they're really ready to release that.
Yeah, that's
because
a
if
good point.
you put that out there now, people going to forget about every other show that you have coming up because the only one they want to hear about is Vader. So you kind of have to keep that one in the tuck, and especially you want to get that right, because if you don't, you can't screw with that.
Well, I will say this. If they are going to do a Vader movie, Feige would be the guy to do it.
Exactly.
Because Vader almost is like a super villain.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's a very much of a superhero aspect to him. And
definitely.
And if you got the same guy writing, this movie as you do the Loki series or whatever, that's cool. I remember when they were talking about the Loki series, and I kind of remember a little bit of the premise, but I don't really remember like what timeline it falls in. Because, that's the thing that they always have to do. That's where actually Marvel has gotten similar to Star Wars. It's like, okay, it's like after Age of Ultron, but before like Ant-Man, that kind of thing. They have to, they got all these movies and then they have the main ensemble films. So they have to try to figure out like where in time does this fall.
Right.
And I think that so far they've done a really good job at that.
Oh, yeah, because they have like, and I love they actually come out with these things all the time, especially with Marvel, where you have all the movies that's been released, but to watch them in the order where they make sense to the overall story. Like, okay, you might have to watch, even though Iron Man came out first, you might have to watch Captain Marvel first, then the first Guardians of the Galaxy, then go to Iron Man. You know what I'm saying? Like they actually have like the trail of like, okay, how everything connects. So when you watch it in this particular order, all the movies, the TV shows, all of it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Ronaldo says, if this movie is about Vader, I hope it's inspired by Vader and the Ghost Prison. That comic is spectacular. It would be great to see in live action. Actually, any of the comic book series that were the Vader standalone series, I think would actually make really good series. And I'm talking anything from what I remember with the new canon, it was like around the 2015. Then you had like the 2017 and 1920. You basically have had these. The only one that would be a little strange would be that odd dark something. That one where Vader was shown on a horse, like.
Oh yeah, that one.
Almost like jousting kind of thing or whatever. I mean, it was a cool series. It was very short lived. I think it was only like 3 or 4 issues or something, but it was kind of odd. I'm not gonna lie. It's a little bit weird. Mom goes on to say, how many Star Wars movie directors are there? Well, it's not so much that there's Star Wars movie directors.
Well, there's 8 of them, but.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there would be. There's Lucas, Kirshner, Marquand, and then figure like, that'd be it because Lucas did the whole prequel trilogy. Then you have Gareth Edwards, you have J.J. Abrams, you have Rian Johnson.
Ron Howard. Gareth Edwards.
I said that.
Oh.
I think that would be it then.
Yeah.
I think we covered it. Yeah, that's how many have directed so far. But when we talk about Star Wars directors, these are people that, they come in and direct a movie no different than anything else. It's just you have to be careful who you bring in to direct these movies because just like once again, they're about to make the same mistake. They get all excited about Patty Jenkins doing this Rogue Squadron thing, and then everybody doesn't like Wonder Woman 1984, so now Kathleen Kennedy gets nervous, and instead of saying,
Well, let me ask you this question. Is it more, and this is where I think a lot of it may fall, and we kind of talked about this before, but is it more the director or is it more the writers?
Well,
because you're only directing what's written, and I get as a director, if you feel like something doesn't, come off well or whatever, you will have the writers rewrite some stuff or.
Well, it's not just that, but I mean, even if you have some really well-written thing, I mean, if the director's not giving the actors the right direction, the movie's going to suffer. But I know what you're talking about, though, because in a lot of cases, these directors are writing the movie, which is maybe not a good idea.
Yeah, and that's the part, like, for Rian Johnson obviously being that case. But I'm thinking, like, okay, but I think even JJ, he did Force Awakens.
Well, it was him and Lawrence Kasdan, though.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. And then you always had JJ writing with somebody.
Yeah. But I think, when you actually have, and I think that's what needs to kind of go back to the actual writers, because that's what you do.
Well, but besides that, everybody forgets that the original Wonder Woman was actually not only written by somebody different, but somebody else is going to direct it.
Mm-hmm.
Patty Jenkins came in kind of like in the middle. Now, granted, that's not to diminish her role in that movie being probably the best DCEU movie, but at the same time, if you're putting Patty Jenkins completely in charge, don't expect that same movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's not even a question of that. I think that where it comes in is that you just have to look at these directors and go, look, can you give us the movie that we want? It shouldn't matter about how another movie does, because it's made by a different
person. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it might be the same person directing it, but it's like that's a different set of circumstances.
True.
It's like you can't base on how good a Star Wars movie is based on how good or bad, say, Wonder Woman is.
Well, what I'm saying is, I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing especially with Star Wars, is the writing of it. Like, okay, how some things just don't make sense. So it's kind of like, if you kind of fix that part, then the directing of it, it's not, like I said, I don't think, like, they're like, even when we talk about The Last Jedi, like, I don't think there was bad directing in the sense of the performances from the actors. I think they played them fine, but I just think that the writing thing, like, okay, why is Benicio del Toro stuttering? Like, why are you bringing him to do that part? Once again, it was a waste. Why are we just throwing away Captain Phasma? That's a writing thing. That has nothing to do with the direction, because I think that's just, but of course, when you're the director and the writer, it kind of goes hand in hand. So you just look at the main thing as a director. But if you actually had writers to actually write good material that actually made sense, that was, thought of, like we keep saying, it's planned, it's thought out.
Well, the problem is that nobody, even when Lawrence Kasdan wrote The Empire Strikes Back, with Lucas, but it was basically Kasdan that wrote it. I mean, that didn't survive. I mean, Irvin Kershner and the rest of the crew were making decisions all the time, and there were rewrites and stuff like that. It's not so much that nothing stays in its purest form, but you also have to have a director that says, hey, you need to rewrite this.
Well, no, I'm just saying, yeah, I mean, I get that.
So if you're like you said, though, if you're the director and the writer, you're not going to have that conversation. Well, you might say, you know what, the scene isn't working, I mean, because you don't want the writer to be like, I want it how I wrote it. Pulling Michael Jackson on you, But I mean, and nobody really usually falls that deep in love with their own scripts. I mean, I guess there probably are some that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's kind of a conflict, because I think in some ways, especially with something like, depending on the project, I think it's like, for something like Knives Out, like, okay, that's kind of an original thing. So it's like, okay, you can do that. But if you got something like Star Wars that's kind of has this whole lineage.
You know what? I don't think that's the problem. I'm going to go back to something I've said 100,000 times. It was the fact that it wasn't planned. That's the problem. I don't think the writing's the problem. Rian Johnson obviously is a really good writer, but the problem is he was allowed to just write whatever he wanted. There was no cohesiveness, or no cohesion, I should say, to the entire sequel trilogy.
Right. I mean, and that is a very valid point, and I don't disagree with you on that. But I'm still saying, like, I think the writing, like the whole Canto Bight scene, like that was unnecessary. Like, we didn't need that. And
yeah, but see, again, I think that if you actually had those guys sit in a room and say, okay, here's 7, here's 8, 9. Let's write an overall story arc. That's the first thing we're going to do, which wasn't done.
Right.
First thing we're going to do is we're going to write an overall story arc. Here's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, you can do whatever you want. You just have to get us to this point. And even if they go in and refine things, because not just have a beginning, middle, and end to the overall trilogy, but even each movie should have a beginning, middle, and end that everybody collaborates on. So all the movies are basically themed similarly. This is why the original trilogy works and the prequel trilogy worked story-wise. It's just the execution that was bad. It's because you had a guy, even though he did have people help him write the scripts, well, at least in the original trilogy, you still basically had it to where there was a basic outline done of each film even. And then, okay, now you can go ahead and make some of these decisions. Now, if Rian Johnson wants to go in and kind of do what he does, okay, fine. But he's going to be constrained, though, by whatever they all worked out together in a room. Mm-hmm. I think the problem is that he wasn't restrained. That basically what happened is, JJ finished The Force Awakens, and it's Rian Johnson's turn to come up, and it's like, yeah, okay, do whatever. And then he was trying to do kind of like what you said, you make a Knives Out or something like that, it works great. But you try to make that in Star Wars, not so much.
Right.
Ronaldo has a couple things to say. Now that you mentioned Benicio del Toro, it's amazing that he agreed to be a DJ, or DJ, I think was the name of it. And years ago, he refused to be Darth Maul. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that is kind of weird. But then again, Darth Maul was a really different character, though. He goes on to say, personally, I think direction is more important. I think a great director can make a good movie out of a bad script. That's true, too. And it is. I mean, in essence, that's true, because the direction is everything. Because how many times have you actually read the scripts of famous films, and even though they were the final scripts, it's not the way it is in the movie? Or sometimes, books and stuff like that don't always translate well to film. It's because there's a special kind of a thing. A director, you could get like 4 different directors directing the exact same script, and you're going to get 4 different films.
True.
It's all because of the way that they had the the actors read it, and exactly, all that
style.
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. But I'm just saying that there are a lot of things when we're looking at Star Wars that's like that just didn't need to be there to begin with, and as from the writing standpoint, I think that it's like, okay, you're losing, or you really don't understand certain things about Star Wars to that degree. And I think,
and again, I think a lot of it just suffers from the fact that it wasn't pre-planned.
Yeah.
That's where I think the writing fell apart. I don't even think because the writing within itself was okay. Where it was, you got a Canto Bite scene because they didn't know where to go, because there was no plan. So it's just like, well, we'll just have them do this or whatever. We'll throw that in there. Or, it started to get careless because there was no direction. It's no different than driving. You have a rough destination in mind, but nobody's mapping how to get there. And you're just
aimlessly driving.
Yeah, you're just kind of, well, I don't know, that looks kind of cool. Nobody is really steering the ship at that point. And then they try to put the genie back in the bottle when it was too late. By the third movie, everybody's like trying to fix it. It's like, well, you shouldn't have even been in this position. And I think the High Republic is really great proof of what happens when you actually have people sit in a room and plan something out. Or you can go to The Mandalorian if you want to compare a little bit more apples to apples. Because here you got Favreau and Filoni actually planning things. They had said they had planned 5 seasons of this show? And they have rough ideas of it. Mm-hmm. We reference it on this show all the time, but when we talk about Cobra Kai, brilliant example of what happens when you have people who actually outline and plan out a series. Mm-hmm. And you make little changes along the way. Like, they had said, for instance, if the actress who, played Kumiko wasn't going to return, or Chosen wasn't going to return, then they had planned for that. There were backup plans. So they had the primary plan they had, but then they had a contingency in case, an actor or actress that they wanted didn't agree to come back. Same thing with Elizabeth Shue. Mm-hmm. The plan was, if it wasn't her, they were going to say that, the husband was the one that wrote the Facebook message and all that stuff. So they actually had a plan. They actually planned so deeply that they even said, okay, if our A plan doesn't work, we have a B plan. Well, in Star Wars, they didn't have any plan. They just kind of let everybody run loose. And I think that what ended up happening was they thought, look, we got a talented group of directors and, they can write and all this stuff. And in some cases, they actually brought in writers. Surely these guys are professional. They should be able to come up with something. But that goes to your point that it's like, in any other movie, sure, but not Star Wars.
All right.
Because you have to remember, it goes back to the fact that Star Wars came from Lucas.
Right. And
if you were going to do that, you should have had Lucas write it.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't discredit, like, and I completely agree with the whole plan thing. But I think once you go from there, I think it's like the writing of certain things is kind of like, this isn't, like, on the page, it's like kind of like, all right, Benicio del Toro's character, DJ, stutters, and he's, like, this guy is a really dark actor, like, and to get what we got out of him, just his character alone, you didn't need it. Like you said, why do you have Vin Diesel playing Groot? It's kind of like, it's one of those situations. Or
oh yeah, I know.
Why did you have what's her name? Who played Phasma?
Gwendolyn Christie.
Gwendolyn Christie. Okay, like, granted, don't get me wrong. Like, you could have got any, like, tall, physically imposing woman to play. Like, you didn't need to get her, especially if you're not going to show her face at any point. So what was the, what I'm saying? Like, that's what I'm saying. Just aside of, it just might as well just had Daniel Craig as a stormtrooper. Like, why? You see what I'm saying? Just aside from the fact that he wanted to do it. So that's what I'm saying. I think it's just like a lot of the writing, and like you said, like, just, it didn't make sense.
See, but in that comment right there shows you why, even though I'm sure everybody would have been complaining about Lucas, but see, when Samuel L. Jackson said, "Oh, just put me in as a stormtrooper," he was like,
Right. No, like, you're too...
No, we're not going to... If we're going to have you in the movie, you're going to play somebody substantial.
Exactly.
I'm going to use your acting abilities and your physical presence and all this.
Yeah, people, you see Samuel L. Jackson, you don't think, some, this pilly little stormtrooper. Like,
right.
This Shaft.
That's the kind of thing that you basically... That's the kind of thinking that you need. And I mean, I get it. They're trying to do stuff. Sometimes, too, the A-list actor wants to be in there, but you don't want too many A-list actors in there because then it's, oh, look, it's Daniel Craig as a whatever. But remember when the whole speculation of The Last Jedi was happening? Mm-hmm. One of the things, and we had debated on it the whole time during numerous... Well, actually, I think it predates our show a little bit because actually I think the second episode was like the Last Jedi review. But... I remember when we were talking about it, it's funny. Sometimes I think that our Star Wars conversations actually were like a show, but they were just you and I talking. But I remember one of the big things that we were talking about, and they talked about back on Jedi Council too, when that was on, was, Benicio del Toro, he's probably going to play a Sith Lord, or he's going to play some, like... Sith assassin or something, and then he ended up playing some stuttering computer hacker.
Exactly.
Which, don't get me wrong, I'm glad they brought the slicers in because that was kind of an expanded universe thing. So to actually have a slicer being represented in canon was just mind-blowingly cool, but it could have been so much more cool.
Yeah.
Ronaldo says, if the Cleopatra movie is bad and the Loki series is bad, do you think Patty and Waldron will be fired? Yeah, I don't know. I really don't. At this point, it's anybody's guess. And you know what? That uncertainty is what's wrong.
Yeah, and that's why, like, we keep bringing it up on the last part, a couple episodes. That's why I love what they're doing with The Mandalorian. It's because if you think about it, like, they're giving these directors... Rick Famuyiwa, you're getting Deborah Chow, you're getting, Dallas,
Bryce Dallas Howard.
Thank you. Bryce Dallas Howard. You're getting all these different type of directors who are doing Star Wars movies. Not movies, but series, episodes, and they're getting better and better. You see the first season, some of the things that they've done. Then you bring them back to direct some stuff in the second season. And once again, like I said, they keep getting better with their storytelling. So eventually, like, I could see them grooming, and to me, that makes more sense to groom your own Star Wars directors, if you will.
Absolutely.
That's planning, to your point. That's planning. Like, I'd rather groom my own people who specifically understand my
it's like
franchise.
a Star Wars. It's a Star Wars director's training camp is what it is.
Exactly.
It's like you're teaching these people how to do Star Wars.
So when you do that, now it's like, okay, now when I send you off to like, okay, well, you know what? I feel confident. You can go ahead, and now Deborah Child's doing the ObiWan series, and now you're getting your own thing that you're doing. So you're not tied to the Mandalorian. I'm letting you branch out a little bit more. Next thing you know, Deborah Child's going to probably direct her own movie. I'm fine with that because she has a proven track record.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too, just using the Mandalorian as an example. Here's another element of that. And this is another point this kind of goes into what you're saying, but now it's a flip side of that. Nobody, when Robert Rodriguez was brought in to do it, nobody was going, well, his last film didn't do so hot. Maybe we shouldn't have him direct an episode. No, it was like, look, this is the episode. This is a story we want to tell. We think that you're the director to tell that based on some things that you have done. Mm-hmm. Nobody's looking at his last project or whatever to see if it was a success or failure and just ripping the thing away from him if that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think that Lucasfilm has to stop doing. They have to stop looking at the last thing that they do. It's one thing if they do that before they hire him. What's killing me is they hire him, and then in a lot of cases, they announce that they've been hired.
See, that's why I really want to know what happened. I really would love to hear the backstory on the Colin Trevorrow thing. Like, what really made Kathleen say no?
Yeah, I mean,
because everybody loves the Duel of the Fates script. So, to your point earlier, you were saying like, okay, how many times have you seen scripts that are like, all right, this looks amazing, but we don't know how it's going to translate to film. Mm-hmm. Or maybe his direction, like you said, could have been off, and so then like even the script was good, his direction might have been off, and so now you don't get a good movie. So I'm wondering, what was it?
Well,
that really just made them.
Because, once again, I don't remember what it was. It was the movie that he had made that came out around the time that he was making Episode 9, bombed, and they got nervous and pulled the plug on him. Mm. Once again. And it's like, okay, but Jurassic Park was pretty succcesso though.
Yeah.
And so was another one that he did. So it's kind of like, okay, you're looking at the last thing he did and it bombed or whatever, but why did it may not have been anything that, and if it was him, maybe it was because it was under a different set of circumstances or whatever, but you can't just announce a thing and let a guy start working on a movie and doing all this and then go, well, you know what, your last movie bombed, so we're going to take it away from you.
You know what's funny is that, like, bring in, I think, correct me if I get the timeline wrong, but so they bring in Rian Johnson because his last movie was good, but then he bombed Last Jedi, but then makes Knives Out, which is successful.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like,
that's true.
Your movie, because you thought that because the last one was successful, but then yours though, your movie is the one that bombs, but then the one afterwards.
And not only that, he made the movie that divided the entire fan base, created toxicity in Star Wars, and forever divided and destroyed the invincibility of Star Wars. And exactly.
But then the movie right after it, though.
And then the movie right after it, everybody
is like praising.
Praising, and it's amazing. It's up for all these like Academy Awards and all this stuff. And, you got to figure that now Rian Johnson's all like, my friend here thinks it's just fine, and that's such a nice vindication thing for him because, again, you can't go by that. And that's just irresponsible decision-making, in my opinion, on the part of Lucasfilm. Mm. I mean, it would be, it's funny because, people joke around, getting all these guests. It's like, it would be really hard if we actually got Kathleen Kennedy on the show.
Because you want to rip into her?
You'd want to, and you would probably just start doing these soft little digs, like not enough to make her rip off her mic and, hang up the Zoom or whatever. But, you can't just be like, oh, yeah, we love you. Because,
Yeah. No, I would just ask, I would honestly okay, walk us through what happened. That's all I want to know. Because my thing is we can armchair quarterback this thing, and we can, but I don't know what happened. You know what I'm saying? So
if only we had the kind of viewership that she would agree to come on here and this is the show that, yeah, okay, with you guys, I'll let you guys know what happened. I kind of wish, or she might be like, you know what, you only have under 100 viewers per thing or whatever. Maybe you're the show that I'll do that with or whatever. But I don't know. Ronaldo says, if I'm not wrong, Colin's last film got bad reviews. No, you're right. That's what we're saying. Added to the fact that he really wanted to make a sequel to The Last Jedi. The combination ended up killing him. But the thing is, though, and this is what's really weird, and this just kind of shows you how you can easily flip the script on a movie. So The Last Jedi is looked at as bad, right? I got it. But the fact that if you paired it with Duel of the Fates, it actually changes the nature of The Last Jedi. I'm not necessarily saying that it rights every wrong, but it puts it in a new perspective where it's not as bad. If you remember the script of Duel of the Fates. And that's where I think that it was a strength, but I think, Ronaldo, you're correct in the sense of she probably was like, oh, no, we gotta retcon it. But then again, if you talk to JJ and all those guys, they say, well, they didn't retcon it, and they'll point out specific areas where they did not retcon The Last Jedi. In JJ Abrams' opinion, he made a sequel to The Last Jedi. It was just that he changed the tone and he made it a little bit different. The other thing, too, with Colin Trevorrow's version, you would have had to recast Leia. There'd be no way around it. She was way too heavenly. There's no reusing old footage of Carrie Fisher on that one.
You're right.
You would have had to create a CGI. She would have had a Jar Jar or something. Yeah. Get somebody in a mocap suit and, basically paste her face on and go from there. If you're going to do it that way. But, that is an interesting thing. And this is kind of a new era of filmmaking in that they're doing this, is that you get these people that are so unsure with their franchises. It's like, you can't make movies like that.
That's why they need to let Filoni and Favreau run it.
Yeah, because here's some guys that really know. They get it. They know what it is that they want. They know what it is they're looking for. They're like, okay, look. This is a story we want to tell. This is a director that we want to use to tell it. It's not based on your last movie. It's not based on anything, esoteric or weird. It's just very simple. You come in, you do the job. If we didn't think you can do the job, we wouldn't have brought you in the first place. And that's one of the reasons why it's successful. You don't see this whole crazy thing, because if you think about it, it looks really bad on Lucasfilm's part when you hire a director and then you fire him a week later.
Yeah, you look unstable. And it looks like you don't know what you want or what you're doing. Okay, well, why
exactly.
did you... Yeah.
Exactly. Because if they jack up Patty Jenkins's thing any more than they already seem to have, if they actually bring in Sorkin to write it, now maybe that was always the plan, I don't know. But if they start having this knee-jerk reaction to the whole Wonder Woman thing, it's like, well, okay, now you're just going to look like you have no idea. Trust me, Patty Jenkins will get another film job. She'll get another directing gig. She's not going to be hurt from this. Hopefully Wonder Woman 3 is a little bit better, but they haven't ripped Wonder Woman 3 away from her. It's kind of like, okay, if that's another thing too. It's like if Wonder Woman 1984 has been getting these really bad reviews, which it has, and it's a mediocre movie at best, okay, that the DC studios would be way more justified in going, maybe we're going to go with somebody else for Wonder Woman 3. They'd be way more justified in doing that than Kathleen Kennedy saying, well, that movie in that other franchise didn't do so well, so we're going to take away this movie from you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like if DC's letting her make the third Wonder Woman film, which it looks like that's what's happening, then why would you, when you're in a completely different franchise? Now, I get it, though. There is the other side of that argument, which says, listen, Star Wars is a very fragile, very laser-focused thing. It's not like other franchises. You have to be right on. But my point is, if she was good enough, if you felt she was good enough to make the movie in the first place, that hasn't changed.
Right.
You know, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to say, well, let me see the movies that you have in development. Let me look at the dailies. Let me see what's going on there.
Ronaldo says, I think Duel of the Fates and Last Jedi is similar to the case of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Fans hated the story, but they loved the progress it made.
Yeah. With Duel of the Fates, though, I think it was actually almost the opposite. I think they really loved the story. Most people seem to really love the story. With The Last Jedi, I think that they liked, if they liked anything, they liked the chances it was taking.
Yeah, there's parts of the story that they like.
Right. I can't say they really liked the story because the problems were, if you really take it at a sort of a macro level, if you had like a top 3 things that everybody hated, it was Luke's characterization that they hated.
Right.
They hated that. They hated the fact that it had like a kind of a Marvel humor type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they hated the fact that it was like a Battlestar Galactica episode, more than a Star Wars film. And the Canto Bight scene sort of falls in there too, because it was not Star Wars-y to people. And
then if you had another big one is the underuse of really good actors or actresses.
Yeah, and even the characters too, because
and
Finn
that's
being the biggest.
Yep, Finn, DJ, Phasma,
sure,
Maz.
Yeah,
you know,
the Maz scene was completely unnecessary.
Yep.
If you're gonna have her in the film, have her do something more substantial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, there were all kinds of really weird issues in there, and of course, nobody really liked the Rose character.
Right.
You know, it's like Kelly Marie Tran's performance aside, it was fine. It was just the character was just not
needed.
Yeah, and I understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to make a everyman's character, kind of like almost like sort of, well, even though this is a little bit more comedic, but Star Trek Lower Decks, which is absolutely hilarious. But the idea for the non-comedic part was like, look, you're seeing everything from the bridge and all these main, the main ranking characters. Mm-hmm. What about the guys that are just kind of in the lower decks and how they're being affected by all this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what I think that they were trying to do with the Rose character was like, look, you basically have these people who are heroes too that aren't necessarily, holding some ranking position on the ship or something. They're just, whatever.
Yeah. Ronaldo says, what I was referring to is that fans hated The Last Jedi and Attack of the Clones, but they loved the progression of those stories.
Ah.
Yeah. I figured that's where he was going with it. Yeah, I mean, Attack of the Clones was the weakest out of that, out of the series, I guess, if you will.
I think so. I mean, the funny thing is that I enjoy...
Story-wise, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy watching Attack of the Clones more than I enjoy watching Phantom Menace, usually.
Mm-hmm.
But I still say that Attack of the Clones is far weaker than the Phantom Menace as far as the story and as far as a lot of the, the acting is a little bit worse. And I mean, man, at least you have Liam Neeson for Phantom Menace.
Right.
It's like, I don't know what some of that stuff was. You did have Padme in her white pants, though. That was the saving grace of Attack of the Clones. But.
And you had Yoda. That's the first Yoda duel.
Yeah, that was the first Yoda duel. And again, I mean, you could almost say, and this is where I think Ronaldo's point comes in, really loud here, is the fact that there were elements of Attack of the Clones that were really good. Like Dooku, for instance.
Well, you really got a chance to kind of see the descent. And, you brought this up before, that they could have started the prequels with Attack of the Clones.
Yep.
and then moved on from there and kind of stretched that out into maybe even got into like Revenge of the Sith could have been like a little bit more like Anakin as Vader, at that point. But
well, what I think that they should have done was actually had like an episode 2.5 to where you can have parts of Revenge of the Sith maybe be the end of 2.5.
Right.
Have a little bit more of Clone Wars type of thing in 2.5. And then, of course, episode 3 could have been, like, say, maybe started, be 2/3 Revenge of the Sith, and then maybe a little bit after that. Get a little bit more of Anakin as Vader, either in the suit or out of the suit. I remember that was a big debate at that time, too. It was like, there were rumors that the last third of the movie was going to be Vader in the suit.
Right.
And everybody was speculating, when does he turn into Vader? When's he Vader, kind of like non-injured Vader, and then when does he become in the suit Vader? And that was like a big thing. And then it turns out, much to everybody's disappointment, yeah, you got to see Vader in the suit, but it was like the very end of the movie. And he didn't do anything except lumber and
scream no.
And then scream no, which, happened to, thank you, special edition on that one. That was crazy.
Ronaldo also says, so I think they should have let the story progress, Duel of the Fates, instead of rewriting it, Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that they could have done, and we never really talked about this before, they could have actually just had JJ make Duel of the Fates.
True.
They could have, and maybe they could have altered the story a little bit. So, and I think that this goes back to your question on, was it really Colin Trevorrow that they didn't like?
Well, then once again, you still couldn't really do that because you still needed someone for Carrie Fisher.
Yeah, and you know what?
And I think that's why maybe they brought JJ, because he had a contingency plan. Like, okay, well, I have footage that I have from, my movie that I could
maybe
use.
they could do, and he kind of rewrote it around that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. The Carrie Fisher death thing really put...
Yeah.
If only it hadn't happened for a few more years, It's kind of like, okay, well, she could have just hung on for another couple of years. I mean, that was one of the things that was really weird, especially because she was relatively young.
And she was happy. I mean, she was happy to be back in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, it was so sad. I remember we were actually at the studio because it was when Christmas break was about to start. It was the last day that we were in school. And we had stayed late, and we were about to leave, and that's when the story came through that she had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she died like 3 days later. Because I remember we found that out when we were having lunch with
Shannon.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And she was just like, well, it was Princess Leia died and all that. And we're like, whoa, what? We weren't that she was like stable or whatever. What?
Yeah, it was like, no, she just passed like a couple hours. I'm like, no.
That was not a cool time to find out when you're trying to talk to somebody about, business and all this other stuff. And it's like, you know what? We're going to have to reschedule this because I need some time. And I mean, that's the thing, is that she was young enough. We all thought, okay, fine. She had a heart attack. She'll pull through this. No problem. But she didn't. In fact, there were even memes. It was like, 2015, you thought you'd take me. And then it's kind of like, well, she kind of did, though. She's gone. So that was just unfortunate. And I think that, they had to do something. And that's what they ended up choosing to do. It was just, so you're right. They had to do that.
Yep.
But that's going to, I think, wrap up that section. So let us know, what you guys think of Kevin Feige's movie. Do you think that it's going to be a Vader movie? Do you think it's going to be a Thrawn movie? What do you actually think Feige's movie is going to be? And more importantly, when do you think it's going to be released? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, the notification bell. Like, hit every button you can think of except for the dislike button. We don't like the dislike button. All right. Looks like it's time for my favorite segment.
Yes, it is, sir.
It's a segment we call Clear Your Mind. That's right. You guys send us in questions. We take 2 of them every week, and we answer them here. Who's our first person?
The first question question comes from Yuri Goodwin. Why didn't the Jedi just sit Anakin down once they realized he had all the darkness in him before he turned?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
It's like everybody knew that this guy had darkness in him. Why didn't they just be like, listen, we're going to have a little bit of a talk here. But what's really funny about that, too, is the fact that it was almost like they were trying to keep all that stuff. They would have been far better off being like, listen, man, you're kind of getting a little Sith-like here. The Sith are these bad guys, and here's what they're sort of like. And, because he might have even come to the conclusion himself. Like, I mean, Palpatine's kind of like a dad to me, but he kind of sounds like what these guys are talking about, too. It's really tough to say, and I think a lot of it is it's no different than, in regular life, right? Hindsight's always 20/20. I mean, you can look back on a situation and go, wow, I can't believe this wasn't obvious to me. I should have done X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C, and
we'll be all fine here.
Sure. I mean, if you think about it, but it goes back to Palpatine clouding the light side, and
well, I think one of the main reasons they didn't sit Anakin down was for two reasons. One, he, like I said before, when you have someone like Anakin who essentially is the child of the Force, you can't once he's gotten to a certain point where he understands his abilities, you can't really stop that. Like, you can't really stop him per se, because he knows what he can do, and he knows that, and I think that the other part to that is the Jedi knew what he can do, and they needed him because this was his thing. Like, he loved, jumping into action, and that was his thing. Obi-Wan was more like, okay, let's be more political, let's be more diplomatic, let's try to find a smarter way around it. Anakin was about that life. Anakin was just like, nope, saber's out, I'm out. Catch up, master. Well, and that's kind of his thing, where he lived for that. But it's like in a lot of ways, his unconventional means of doing things won them a lot of battles.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So it was proven that, like, it's like, okay, but because they always used to talk about, it's like, well, not Barriss Offee, but her master. I can't think of her name in my life. But, she always was talking about, like, his methods. Plo Koon would talk about his methods. Mace would talk about, like, this is not really, like, well, tell me you have a plan. Well, sort of. It's kind of like this. I don't really know until I start doing it. Well, that's comfort. It's like, I've heard that about you. That. So his reputation kind of preceded him. But you couldn't argue with the fact that he got results. So it was just like, well, it's working. Why not? So there's that part. But like I said, once you kind of got somebody like Anakin, it's almost like benching like your best player on your team. It's like you don't really want to, but because I kind of need you to win these games for us. So it's like, which one is more important at that point?
Well, I think that's a good point, actually, is the fact that it got results, and they knew that. They weren't going to sit him down and have that talk, because it's like, even though they were against it, and they would at times caution him, yeah, it's kind of like, well, he does get the job done, and it kind of sucks, but desperate times call for desperate measures.
Yeah, I would say it's during wartime, so it's like, you're already getting clouded in the Force because everybody's all freaked out. So, like, I don't have time to really try to manage him to that degree. If things were, like, calmer, and they were just like little missions, then yeah, I could see them doing that.
And they did. I mean, there were times in the Clone Wars where they benched him, they punished him, they did all kinds of things. And to his credit, he was, right up till the end, responsive to people chastising or trying to teach him something. He wasn't completely shut off with it. It wasn't so much like, okay, I know all this stuff. It's kind of like, okay, I'm powerful, but I still realize that I have things I can learn from these guys. It's just I'm better than them. Or at least so he thought.
Right.
Ronaldo says, maybe Anakin was suppressing the darkness so the other Jedi wouldn't find out. I don't actually think that was the case. I don't really think that he was even that aware. And even if he was pretty brazen about it. I mean, he wasn't.
Yeah, he was always defiant, like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I don't really think that he perceived anything as darkness. And in fact, that was the problem, is the fact that when the darkness was actually starting to take him, he didn't see it that way. He thought that, hey, you guys are the ones that are evil. He even said, well, in my eyes, Jedi are evil, and you can understand from the way the Jedi were acting telling him to spy on his friend, doing all this shady stuff. It's like, well, yeah, you can understand. That was one of the things that I think that Lucas did really well in Revenge of the Sith, is they really made it to where you perfectly saw both points of view. If you wanted to take the Anakin Obi-Wan thing, from Anakin's perspective, you could understand why he felt the way he felt, and that he really wasn't feeling like he was evil. Remember, the Empire actually was the legitimate government in the eyes of most people. And when Obi-Wan was like, well, you got to turn against him and all that, it was kind of like, it was almost like Anakin thought of him more as a terrorist now. It's like, well, now you're, a rebel. I mean, you're going against the government here. But then Obi-Wan was like, no, you don't understand. The guy that's taken over the government's like a Sith Lord.
Right.
So we have to fix that and reestablish things.
Honestly.
Right, and you know that now, and it's kind of like, well, because he could keep people alive that you love, or so you think.
Yeah.
And it gets kind of messy. Ronaldo goes on to say, perhaps it was the will of the Force that the Jedi would not know.
No, like I said,
perhaps it was the script.
No, I mean, I think they all knew that he was, like I said, they saw the darkness in him, and Anakin knew, but he was just kind of like, he didn't understand it all of course, because he would have those like nightmares and visions and stuff like that, and he'll be in pain, and he even went to Yoda about it. He tried to kind of sweep it on the rug and not really expose him, but he was like, Master,
I have this friend.
Right, exactly. And I think he actually said that, like, and they have this conflict, and Yoda's just like, well, your friend should probably let go. But how do you let go when you care so much? It's like, well, caring is a part of being a Jedi, true. However, you can't be, so he was giving him that wisdom. And I think Yoda, once again, he always knew, but it's just still like, once again, it's like you're in the middle of a wartime. You need your best guys up front. You got to have Anakin in the game as long as he can. And you try to like, okay, maybe once all this stuff comes, they probably just thought they just had more time to deal with it.
Well, not only that, but I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head before too, is that I don't think anybody necessarily perceived it as true darkness. It wasn't until later. It wasn't until like, say, around the last season of the Clone Wars, when things were starting to get in, when it was starting to overlap episode 3, because that was when Anakin started doing like truly dark things, like that one prisoner or whatever, when it's like
force choking him.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, if you guys just like go, maybe I could do some. And then when everybody leaves, it's like, all right, now tell me what I need to know. And now it's a little bit more.
Yeah, when he found out he thought somebody killed Obi-Wan, he was on that rampage, like, all right, who did it? And you could see like the anger and everything that was.
Right, like he would have flashes, even throughout the entire series, he would have flashes of that, but it wasn't anything that I think, first of all, it didn't happen around anybody or too many people. And then even if it did, people would just assume, okay, emotions got a little bit heightened during wartime. Like you said, I think that they felt that they had a lot more time to deal with some of these issues. And
yeah, everybody's under stress. I mean, yeah, you probably going to pop off a little bit more. He's younger. He's not as wise as Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan is still significantly older than Anakin. So yeah, he's got that young, fiery, disposition about him. So they're just like, yeah, he'll grow out of it, almost that type of thing. But because even like I said, Mace had a little darkness in him too. And the thing is, what really sent Anakin over the edge kind of was one, not being recognized as a master, but he was on the council. And then 2, when it was time to go face off against Palpatine, Mace was like, no, you're too close to him. Yeah, you sit this one out. And, Anakin's just like, but if he's a Sith Lord, like, he's probably I can help you. But then, of course, Mace is like, dude, I got half the council with me. Like, I'm good. And I'm here. I'm the second in command.
Right.
I think we've got it.
It's like, hello, Mace.
Exactly. Like, and I think that was just, but once again, they just didn't anticipate, Palpatine just being, I mean, he wiped those other Jedi, masters out in like 30 seconds.
The other problem too, well, first of all, yeah, and there's been speculations about that where it's kind of like, okay, he surprised him, he did all this stuff, which is, that's true. There's also a difference between being a Sith Lord and being Palpatine, being Sidious, being the Sith Lord. I mean, the problem is they were probably thinking they're fighting another Maul or Dooku or something like that. They didn't. I don't think they realized how powerful of a Sith Lord he really was.
Yeah, essentially Palpatine is like a Grandmaster Sith.
Yeah. I mean, Yoda, I think, got the sense of it.
Well, yeah, because he realized, I mean, they all realized something was different about him because it's like, okay, when I'm around him, I don't feel the Force.
Mm-hmm.
And that's odd. Like, he's a life form. He's a human being. I should be able to feel him, but I never do. So there's something off. And that's what made him want to spy on him because it's like, okay, something's up with this guy. I can't put my finger on it, but that's what it is. And so, yeah, when like Yoda approached him, it was like, okay, this is the Sith Lord that we've been looking for. And so, like, when I think Yoda really kind of took it into consideration, it's like, okay, if he's been the Sith Lord this whole time, like this whole war, everything, we've been meeting with him, we've been doing all this stuff, we haven't been able to feel his presence. Yoda knows it's like, okay, you're not average. You can't be, because, and then that's why, of course, and especially Yoda had to go deal with him because, like, once Mace and all them got wiped out, he's like, well, no one else can. That's why Obi-Wan said, well, I'll take on the Emperor. He's like, Mace went and yeah, I'll go.
Yeah, Mr. knocked out in 2 seconds of every battle you've ever fought.
Exactly.
With his apprentices.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So, I
mean, if anything, what they should have done, as we've said a million times, is they should have gone together to take out Anakin and then gone together to, I mean, even though, sure, I'm sure Obi-Wan would have been wiped out in 2 seconds against Palpatine too, at least it would have been a distraction for Yoda to do something. But, even beyond that, it's one of the things that I was always thought that was kind of cool about the whole thing was the fact that, Yoda had no fear about facing him because as powerful as he was, in Yoda's time as a Jedi, he's faced like probably some of these super powerful Sith Lords in the past. It's like,
well, that's one thing I've always
like
wondered.
A level 2, It's
well, that's one thing I've always wondered though. Like, okay, what? I don't even think it's so much that. I mean, granted, he's been around for like 1,000, but like, you gotta think about it. Like, okay, the Sith have been extinct for a millennia. So it's like, okay, if they've been extinct for a millennia, and he died at 900 years old, around 900.
Yeah, but the idea though is that the threat even, was around a lot earlier for him than it would have been for anybody else.
Well, true, but I'm just saying,
and
like,
when Bane came up with the rule of 2 and stuff, I'm sure he, faced off against some of these, like, more shadowy guys. Because even though the Sith had been quote-unquote extinct, it's not like they've been inactive.
Well, I mean, that's what I always wonder, like, okay, because I don't think he've ever faced off against, like, I mean, he could have faced off against a Plagueis, but then he would have known Palpatine, too, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was, well, once Bane created the rule of 2, it was like, that's when they started operating in the shadows and stuff like that. And I don't, I know that Yoda's faced off against Sith Lords before. It just been a minute. Yeah. I don't remember who, the other thing that makes it really fuzzy now is, well, what's canon anymore? It's like,
yeah, it's true.
There were things that were true before that aren't necessarily true after 2012. I mean, it's kind of like, and even stuff then has been slightly modified because what would happen is Disney would take their sweet time in bringing some of that older expanded universe stuff into canon. So it's kind of like, well, there was almost like the in-canon explanation before they brought this in versus after. So it's getting a little fuzzy now. I don't actually remember. But that is a really good question, though, as far as that whole thing with Anakin, because I think you're right. It's like you said. It's like, well, we kind of need him to be like this. So,
yep.
So who's next?
The next question comes from Peter Alber. Do you think we will hear the story of the darksaber in the next season of Mandalorian?
Yeah, because I think that the next season of The Mandalorian is going to primarily, now, granted, I don't have any inside information. I should make that clear now. This is all speculation on my part, but I'm pretty sure that logically the next step is going to be, this is going to be about Mandalore. This is going to be about the power struggle for Mandalore. It's going to be about Din basically facing his past and learning what it's like to be a true Mandalorian. It's going to be about Bo-Katan. I think that we're not done with Moff Gideon yet. It's going to be interesting now that they've captured Gideon where the darksaber resides now. But yeah, I think that we're going to see a lot more of the darksaber for the next one. And I also think that we're going to start to learn a little bit more. Because remember, we know its origins already.
Yeah, I mean, we heard about it in Clone Wars and stuff like that.
Sure, it was in Clone Wars. It was prominent in Rebels. And we know that it was it was the lightsaber that was designed by the first Mandalorian Jedi. Actually, I think it's the only Mandalorian Jedi. So you have a situation where it's not so much that we need to really know the origin story of it, although I'm sure there's some casual fans out there that are like, oh, I wonder what's up with that pretty black laser sword. It's
Well, I mean, I'm thinking too, like if they're going to go into that whole war between Mandalore and the Jedi, and this kind of how that kind of...
Yeah, they kind of referenced it, but what was weird about it was the fact that nobody, obviously, because that had ended, I think the Mandalorian Jedi War was before Rebels and Clone Wars and everything, because, Satine was in love with Obi-Wan and vice versa, and you had, of course, Ahsoka knew Bo-Katan real well, and they helped each other on missions all the time. So I think that the Jedi Mandalorian War, I'm pretty sure, happened before that.
Yeah.
And they started getting friendly again or whatever. So I'm not necessarily sure that... I'm sure they're going to reference it because they sort of did. Hey, weren't these the sorcerers that tried to kill us or something like that back from season 1 of The Mandalorian? So I think that you are going to get references of that. But I don't know if they're necessarily going to deal with that. Although that'd be kind of a cool flashback sequence.
True.
To see a little bit of that. And who knows, that could set up... Because one of the things that's interesting about The Mandalorian is how many series is this particular series going to launch?
Right.
It's obviously the springboard to launch a bunch of different series. So, what are they going to do? That's where it's going to get interesting to me.
Ronaldo says, I think we will see the darksaber. I think it would be the Ring of Sauron. There would be great conflict over it.
Yeah, that would actually make a lot of sense because if I remember correctly, there was kind of some conflict over it in Rebels.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Sabine ended up with it, but...
Yeah, Sabine, you had the Maul, you had...
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of like that thing was passed around more times than
pot of greens at it.
I mean, it's just one of those things that the darksaber, because that was one of the things that we were trying to speculate too. I have no doubt that we're going to figure out how Moff Gideon got his hands on it.
Right.
Because I think that there's a lot of story there too. And, the fact that he's wearing Darth Vader-like armor. And there's been some articles on StarWars.com, the official site, that's talking about kind of pay attention to that fact. There's more to this story than meets the eye. And I don't think that Gideon's going to spend season 3 in some sort of Republic prison either. I think he's either going to escape or be freed, or maybe that's like you had said too when Thrawn comes in and is like, okay. Because I think that we've figured out by now, it's safe to say that getting Grogu's blood and everything is this big plot to bring Palpatine back. Or maybe it's sort of like a go-between. Maybe Grogu's blood is to be infused in the Snoke clone. As remember, in Rise of Skywalker, we saw those Snokes being made, and we know that's how he created them. Well, maybe that's how Snoke got the Force.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking that maybe Gideon wouldn't want that power for himself.
Yeah, and there could be a power struggle there. And it also makes me wonder how much are they going to bump this thing up? Because they had said way back when season 1, before it even premiered, they had said that one of the things The Mandalorian's going to do is it's going to set up a little bit the sequel trilogy. It's going to explain, it's going to provide a little bit of a backstory to it, but it's also going to set up some of the events. And so that naturally makes me wonder, well, okay, at what point then is it going to go from the Empire to the First Order then? Are we going to see that transition? Is it, like you said, I mean, is Gideon going to try to, do this power struggle? Is he going to run up against Snoke? I mean, how much are we going to bump up against The Force Awakens? Because remember, we still got like 24 years or 23 years in between the two.
Sure.
So, and then, of course, the other thing is Grogu truly gone for this season? Is he going to sit this season out? It appears that way, which I would actually say, you know what, guys? Bravo. That's a really bold move. Take the one character that everybody loves that, and say, yep, not going to be in. Now the show has to stand on its own, which I think it can more than do, but I will miss seeing the little fella. But all right, I think that's going to do it for our show this week.
Yes, sir.
So hopefully you guys will join us Monday when we talk about something. Just check back, either tomorrow or Sunday, and, it'll be up there. You can watch it here on YouTube or Twitch if you're watching on Twitch. But you can also watch it on our Facebook group, our head-to-head Star Wars community. If you guys haven't joined that yet, join that. We'd love to talk to you because a lot of times we continue the conversation on our Star Wars community page, and we also broadcast our shows especially on that as well. So, be sure to catch us there. So I guess until Monday at 8 o'clock, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.